I'd like to call to order this special meeting of the Anchorage Assembly. Madam Chair, would you please call the roll? Sorry, Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Training.
Here.
Mr. Honeman. Ms. Gray Jackson.
Honored to be here.
Mr. Hall. Here. Ms. Johnston. Here. Mr. Starr.
Here.
Mr. Flint.
Present.
Mr. Steele.
Here.
Ms. Demboski.
Present.
Mr. Peterson.
Here.
Mr. Evans.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Mr. Evans, would you please lead us in the pledge? Mr. Training.
Sir, move to combine when we get down to that item 14A through 4A through 4D.
Is there a second? Second. Is there objection? Hearing none, we'll combine the public hearing on items 4A and 4D. And before we begin, Mr. Mayor, is a member of the administration who wants to quickly walk us through the changes in the S version?
Marilyn, are you prepared to do that? I don't have the S version. Oh, here we go.
Whenever you're ready, Marilyn.
Please
Speak in your microphone.
Through the chair, there was an adjustment to fund balance.
You gotta speak right into it, Marilyn.
Through the chair, there's adjustment to the fund balance calculations, including an update to reflect contributing a proposal to contribute the TAP set aside that was $4.6 million that was previously in the fund balance. It's been pulled out of fund balance and shown as a potential contribution to the trust fund. Mm-hmm. And
Marilyn, I'm sorry. Can you get the mic a little bit closer?
Yes, sir.
You're a soft-spoken woman, which we appreciate.
Additionally, there will be a reduction in the set aside of savings to the trust reserve fund to total $1.9 million, which was previously presented in the proposed version. There's an increase for employee relations of $100,000 for professional services for labor. There is a line item for $195,000 for a fire academy in 2014. There's an adjustment to the municipal manager for transportation inspection that adds a vehicle, an enforcement vehicle for the senior code enforcement officer that was added in 1Q. And then also there's a correction to the revenues for the transportation inspection division that reduces revenues to reflect we had a previous duplication. So this corrects that duplication. We have a $345,000 increase to the police department for a 2014 academy. We have adjustments to Eagle River Parks and Rec to reflect the adjustment to the mill rates between operating and capital for the Eagle River Parks and Rec Fund. And there's an adjustment, an increase for a legal settlement for the Parks and Rec Department.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions on that before we get started? Seeing no one queue, the public
Chair?
hearing. Oh, yes, Ms. Dombrowski?
Yes, my button isn't.
Here, let me try that. See if I can fix this for you. Better?
No, my screen's frozen.
Okay, well, go ahead anyway.
I'll just yell.
Fair enough.
Marilyn, I could barely hear you. Could you clarify for me, did I hear you say the S version accounts for an additional code enforcement officer in transportation, or inspector in transportation?
No, it does not. The original proposed first quarter does include an additional transportation officer, code enforcement officer. The S version includes a vehicle for that officer.
Okay, I didn't hear the word vehicle, so I thought you were putting another person in there. So
No.
I just wanted to clarify. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anybody else? All right, with that, the public hearing is now open. Anybody wish to testify on budget matters? You have 3 minutes. We already had the motion if you want.
Hello, Paul Holden here.
Hi, Paul, this is Barbara. Be sure to mute your phones on that end. Lucinda and Ernie and Paul, if you would, please. Thank you.
For the information of those in attendance tonight, Mr. Honam, Mr. Hall, and Ms. Mahoney are joining us by telephone. And slightly new, we will have the beeper going, so you'll know when your 3 minutes are up. At 30 seconds, it'll start flashing at you. Mr. Graff, welcome back.
Thank you. Chairman Flynn, Assembly members, Ed Graff, Superintendent, Anchorage School District. I want to first of all thank the board, Assembly members for the work that we did last Friday at our work session. It was very, very helpful, very good conversation, and hopefully you found it as productive as the administration and the board members did. Tonight I'm here to respectfully request consideration for the Assembly to provide full funding support for our school resource officer program, as well as reimbursement for the tax collection charges that we have and additional trail fees that ASD currently pays for. Additionally, I would like to ask for your consideration to request full local funding support as allowed with the recent passage of HB 278 and the BSA increase. And again, I thank you for the conversation we had last Friday. I think we submitted some documents to the clerk that hopefully addressed some different questions you may have mentioned on Friday, and I'm here with staff as well to answer any questions you might have.
You might be surprised to hear there are a few questions. Mr. Starr.
Thank you for being here. When do you anticipate your revised or your S version budget to make it through? You'll tender it to the school board, and then the school board votes on it and ultimately brings it back here. What's the scheduling for something like that?
Through the chair, Mr. Starr, we had some brief discussion today with the members of the administration and a few board members, and I believe we're going to start our conversation on Monday, May 5th, to talk a little bit about some different scenarios, and it's expected that we'll have our first budget proposal to the board on the 19th of May.
When does traditionally the money get freed up after the governor's veto and you guys have funding certainty on what happened in Juneau? When is that typical sent to you? Does the governor brief you ahead of time, or how does that work behind the scenes?
My experience has been that he has, once he receives the information, I believe he's got X number of days to make his decision around that. And that would typically put us into late May if it was transmitted to him, within the next week or so. And then we have to present it to our board for approval, and then we would submit to the Assembly. So it's traditionally been submitted to the Assembly in June.
Sure.
And so we have two readings in June.
And you're aware of our conundrum of having to get your tax bills or the co-shared tax money. We have to get those bills out pretty quick here, so we're going to kind of miss those time frames of the actual numbers of tax support that you're needing. But
yeah.
Thank you for the dialogue as well on Friday. It was productive.
Yep.
Ms. Johnston?
Yes, I've run into some confusion about the trail cost. And I have an amendment here that I'm probably not going to make because it was my understanding, do you know where that stands as far as our use of your facilities? I know we've gone back and forth for 4 years, and we've sort of said, is it a wash? Us charging you, you charging us, your availability, our availability. Do you know what the figures are on that? And then what do you understand is the trail cost, and is it municipal-wide, or is it just Eagle River Chugiak?
Through the chair, Ms. Johnson, I don't know exactly if it is a wash. I think we calculated fees through the trail usage based on a request we had from the assembly or one of the assembly members, and I believe that dollar amount was noted in the resolution that was presented on Friday or was discussed on Friday. And I don't have that information available right now. I can certainly follow up on it. And
if you could find out, it was brought to my attention tonight that the $26,000 that I understood is actually an agreement with Chugach Eagle River Parks service area and the school district as far as grooming out there, and I think it's been like a 10-year-long agreement. So I'm a little nervous about stepping into that pale.
sure, I'll see what I can do to get you that information.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Ms. Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Graff, for being here this evening, as well as everybody else who's sitting in that audience, in the audience. You mentioned that you would like to see the Assembly provide the funding that is available under HB 278, correct?
Yes.
And so what process do you think would benefit the school district the most in terms of how we provide that funding? Do you understand what I'm asking?
I believe I do. Through the chair, Ms. Gray Jackson, one of the things we continue to look at anytime we receive funds is the sustainability of those funds, and it's difficult for us to justify using one-time funds for reoccurring expenses and costs. So if you're asking how would it be preferred, I think most definitely we want sustainable funding so that we can plan long-term when we're talking about our most valuable resource, which are our teachers and our personnel.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Gray Jackson. Ms. Domboski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Graff, are you familiar with the contract that you signed in 2013 regarding the Parks and Rec grooming and the trail maintenance?
Through the chair, without actually seeing the contract, I would be negligent in telling you I'm familiar with it.
I just wanted to see if you remembered. The challenge I have with this is you're talking about, I have the contract in front of me, and I know Mr. Rada has copies of it. If you want to get with him, he'll share it with you, I'm sure. The challenge I have is we're talking about trail grooming in Chugach and Eagle River, of which the Parks and Rec Department has taken up 2/3 of the cost, $54,000. So say we groom our trails at Beach Lake Tuesday nights, and we have cross-country skiing for the high schools, and then we groom again Thursday nights just for the high schools. How do you explain not paying your share when we're doing extra work just to benefit you?
I think maybe what I'm responding to is more of the user fees that expand beyond just the Chugach Eagle River area, and so I would have to get more information on that.
I would love for you to get with Mr. Rotter and read that, because the $26,000 amendments, there's two in here specifically for $26,000, and that's exactly the amount that ASD has promised by contract that they would pay the Parks and Rec Department in Eagle River. So I think we're having a little confusion of more than one issue. So it would be helpful for me if you could kind of refresh, and when this comes back up, if there's questions, maybe we can go back to it. Does that sound okay?
Certainly.
Thank you.
I see no more questions. Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank
Graff.
you.
Anybody else who wishes to testify on this matter? And we have lots of seats up in front, so come on down. Welcome, sir.
Mr. Chair, members of the Assembly, my name is Roger Shaw. I'm Vice President of Scenic Foothills Community Council. I sent all of you an email today in terms of my suggestions relative to the first quarter budget amendments, and I'll just do sort of a follow-up in that. Unfortunately, the message that I bring to you from some of the community councils is not the message that some of you would like to hear. We honestly believe in the last few years that services within this municipality have really been going backwards, that they've become less efficient. We are getting less done within this community, and we're really unhappy about that. And you have an opportunity to change some of that tonight with your amendments. from a public safety perspective, many of the people in my community council indicate that they feel less safe in the area. So there is going to be some pressure in the future years in terms of adding to the public safety expenditures so that we have a little bit better feeling in this community. Our schools need help. You've heard from the superintendent of the schools. You'll hear from a lot of parents that their schools do need as much support as we can possibly give them. And also some of our local roads, those that are not state maintained roads. We have local roads throughout our community that are just falling apart. And I was one who started the effort within our community council and started applying pressure a few years ago that ultimately led to the state allocating $3 million per Senate district for just general road rehab, not specifically to state maintained roads. And those are the kinds of things that as the state starts to decrease its funding for us, I still believe that the municipality should try to step up its maintenance and do that. So for those reasons, we need to have the property tax revenues that we can to take care of those. The basic suggestions, well, again, some of the other pressures that we see that are coming in the future is that there's pressure on the state, from the state perspective, of decreasing its revenue sharing to us. That's outside of the cap, and that has been placed outside of the cap. So any reduction in that state funding to us is going to cause a reduction of services somewhere, because we cannot replace it with property tax dollars, it being outside of the cap. And again, there was some talk during this last session of possibly asking the municipalities to pay a greater share of that continued unfunding retirement liability. And even though a significant amount of money has gone in to lower that debt, there still is that pressure that we pay more than the current maximized percentage. So the basic suggestions that I gave to you earlier today is, number one, unfortunately, tax the cap. Absorb in the general government for Anchorage School District, the SROs, and the other things that they have suggested to you this evening. I agree with a tax set aside. And I leave it up to you to determine which of the one-time costs or other expenditures that you wish to approve through the budget amendments this evening. But then I suggest that you balance the budget then with a fund surplus, rather than, as suggested, is to immediately apply fund surplus to property tax relief.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shaw. I don't see any questions.
Okay.
Ma'am, come on up, ma'am.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the Assembly. Thank you for allowing the opportunity for public testimony. This is so... Anyway, we have 5 people here from the Great Alaska Schools of Anchorage group to speak tonight, but we have a lot of people here in support of our public schools. As you know, our grassroots group has grown since the end of January, 3 months, to about actually more than 2,500 families now, and some of them are in the audience today. So I'd like to ask everybody who's here to support public school funding to stand up. Okay, I would like to have you raise your hand if you're from South Anchorage. Raise your hand if you are from West Anchorage. Raise your hand if you're from Eagle River and Shugiak. Raise your hand if you're from Midtown. East Anchorage. You can see that we have representation from the entire Anchorage School District.
Forgot now.
I'm sorry. A little background on Great Alaska Schools. I think you're pretty well aware of our group. We were formed because of the budget crisis facing our schools in January. We met at Winterberry Charter School in January, unrelated to the school, just a meeting place. The first item on our agenda was to try to address the flat funding of the last 3 years by asking for an increase in the base student allocation by the state legislature. The ASD's budget gap looked to be $23 million for next year. If we were only going to receive the amount that the governor had originally put into the budget for schools, which was $25 million for help me out here, energy funds. And the situation was pretty grim. We were going to lose over 150 teachers plus other positions. And school districts around the state were facing the same situation. Our schools have struggled with flat funding over the past 3 years. Inflation has eaten away at our purchase power, and we've had to cut over 200 positions each year since 2011. We've been particularly concerned since our schools have shown significant improvements since the BSA was being increased. We've seen increases in our graduation rates. We've seen increases in our test scores. We've seen decreases in truancy. We want to see these benefits and these improvements continue. We can't do that if we keep cutting. At some point, we can't do more with less. We can only do less with less. We've advocated very, very hard over the last 3 months for a BSA increase, and I think you know about some of our activities. We've had rallies, we've gone door to door, we've had thousands of emails and phone calls and communication to legislators. We have put together a Mythbusters document to address concerns that legislators had over certain issues, and we've been able to explain what the situation really is. We've had a couple of press conferences, which we actually had Ms. Gray Jackson, Mr. Trainey, and Mr. Steelett, and we really appreciate the support you guys have provided us with. Unfortunately, the legislature at the end of the day did not give us the funds that are needed to avoid the cuts this year, let alone avoid the cuts that we anticipate over the next 2 years. The final amount that's coming to the Anchorage School District from the state funding is $11 million. So we're $12 million short, as you know, and I'm going to turn it over to the next representative. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ma'am?
Thanks very much. My name is Allison Arians, and I'm another founding member of the Great Alaska Schools Anchorage Group. So we've learned that while state money is the biggest chunk of our school funding, we also know that a significant amount comes from municipality. One of the first things we learned is that our state legislators cap the amount of money that the muni can contribute to our schools, and Anchorage is paying to that cap. Another interesting thing we learned right away in Juneau is that the first time we went in February was that most of our legislators didn't know that Anchorage was actually paying to that cap. They kept asking us things like, why should we give your schools more funds if your community's not even contributing to its cap? You're not even paying your full voluntary local amount. We're not pulling our weight. Well, we came right home to figure that out. Well, we're not paying our way? What's that all about? But then it turned out we actually were. So then we had to gather data and present it to each of them when we went back to Juneau to really dispel the misconception that Anchorage was kind of a freeloader and not paying to the cap. So I was really proud at that point to show our lawmakers in Juneau that Anchorage is supporting our schools to its cap. So as you know, HB 278 that was just passed by the legislature increases that voluntary local contribution of our communities by allowing additional funding distributed according to the foundation formula to be counted as public school funding, even if it's not part of the base student allocation. We're now allowed to make a local contribution of 23% of the BSA funds plus the funds distributed through that foundation formula by the legislature. So please do what it takes to increase our voluntary local contribution to fund our schools to the new cap. We're proud of the improvements in our schools in the last 10 years, and we don't want to see them losing ground. We still aren't where we need to be, and we won't be able to get there when we're losing teachers, counselors, graduation coaches, teachers' aides, and other staff every year. While we would love to see some of this year's budget surplus go to our schools, we would like to see a permanent commitment to increasing the voluntary local contribution, not just one-time money. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ms. Arians. There's a couple of questions here. Ms. Johnston?
Sure.
Yes, thank you for explaining to our legislators that we are taxing to the cap. I'm not sure if others are aware of this, and I had my aha moment this year as far as when they did lower that cap, that it was because of the federal mandate for equal access to education. So it is a formula that we have to fall into, and it's a statewide formula.
Right. It's that 23%, right? So if we don't, the way I understand it is it's that 23%, and then if we stray from that, then we don't get federal impact funds.
Right.
But my understanding is that when we add in the other stuff, it sort of changes the formula around a little bit. So I'm asking, I don't know exactly how all those formulas work, but what I'm saying is, whatever that is, let's just keep going to the cap, because that was something to be proud of in Juneau. And only about 4 other communities in Alaska are able to do that. And so it was nice to be able to say that we're pulling our weight.
Right. Thank you.
Mr. Starr?
You could sit up here and what I'm asking I don't want it to be flippant. We approved the school district budget by default this year, meaning there was a minor technicality. I was trying to move for a second public hearing because, quite frankly, when the school district budget was in front of us about 3 weeks ago, there was 3 people here. the same. Two have already spoken, Mr. Graff, Mr. Abbott, and there was one other gentleman. But where were you folks back in the day when we were talking about your school district budget?
We were in Juneau. I'm sorry.
Everyone?
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you were here, but the point is we covered all of those details. You know, the maximum taxation limit is set in your budget. That budget was approved 3 weeks ago. I'm not holding firm on that, but you can understand our technicalities as well, too. So we'll approve what we're asked for. I hear appreciating being asked for more, but the idea here is that, you know, let's make sure we keep it in context as to how and what we can approve and when. So the idea that your maximum taxation levels were asked for and approved in the current budget is a little bit of a conundrum. That's why I asked Mr. Graff when we're likely to see the revisions, so that we know how you're going to spend the money. That's what we kind of adhere to up here is funding an approved budget. And so I've got flexibility for you tonight. We've talked about it at the work session, but again, it's a team effort. I appreciate that. I wish they would applaud for us when we do the work that we do up here.
Sure. I guess I would just say that things have changed since that, 3 weeks ago in terms of what the legislature was doing. So, we were trying to go to where we needed to go in June. We were focusing on our efforts on Juneau before that session ended, and
I got it. We're here now. We've got an operating budget to approve as well, which is a big one. So thanks for being here. You're very well educated.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Arians. Senator Little, welcome.
Hello. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I'm an enthusiastic volunteer with Great Alaska Schools, and
even though I know you, you have to tell us your name.
Oh, Suzanne Little. I'm sorry. My apologies. Do you need my address?
No, that's
okay.
That's all.
We used to have to do that. A safe learning environment is an essential community value. I'll say that again. A safe learning environment is an essential community value. And I've never thought it was right to create a budget savings at the expense of safety of our children. And my experience is that the people of Anchorage are happy to pay for essential, high-quality services, essential services like keeping our schools safe. This last legislative session, parents and kids all over the state pushed hard to get the legislature to fund education so that teachers wouldn't have to be cut. Despite amazing energy and unprecedented citizen involvement, unfortunately, we were not completely successful. There will still be teacher cuts in Anchorage. With funds available to you now, the municipality of Anchorage needs to retake the responsibility for funding public safety at our schools, funding the safety resource officers. The safety of our children and our schools is an essential community value. Spend the municipality's money on the school resource officers so we can keep a few more teachers. I believe the community of Anchorage is behind you in doing such a thing.
Folks, I appreciate this applause, but we'll get through this a little bit more quickly if you can hold it till the end, okay? Welcome, ma'am. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Elise Galvin, and I also am part of Great Alaska Schools. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you all. So similar to what you've just heard about the safety officers, and I would offer that they are keeping our whole community safe, right? Just like that, I'm here to speak about the Parks and Rec piece of this puzzle. And I understand there's some questions in terms of numbers and so forth, and I honestly don't know the numbers. All I know is that it makes sense to me and to our group that the whole public uses these trails and the parks, and that if they are used for something as simple as field trips, et cetera, that we share, because it's a common good. It's a good for the muni, and of course what's good for the municipality is also good for the schools and vice versa. So I don't know how this came to be, where there was this, moving of money and such. I don't know all of that. All I can tell you is that I did call Juneau today. I did a little research. I tried Fairbanks, didn't reach them, but Juneau says, no, we don't charge Juneau School District for using parks. No, we don't charge them for using trails. If it's being used for school purposes, if it's educational, if it's for athletics, etc., that is not the case. So that's kind of good to have a little bit of sense of what other folks are doing with regard to that. Similarly, I understand there's some admin fees going on related to taxes and property tax mailings or delinquent tax payments. And I would offer that sort of the same thing, that if it's something that's shared, it would be great if the Muni could pick that up. And then I would like to offer one more thought, and that is to be mindful that our community also wants to partner with you. As we think about ways to keep our trails and our parks beautiful, be mindful that our students do spend a lot of hours cleaning them up, grooming them, and they should. And we as parents think that's important, that service is also done, because it is a common good, it's a public good, and we appreciate that. Likewise, as we think about how you as a whole body is going to support public schools, hopefully in the next little while, that we keep in mind also that the good of the graduation rates climbing is important to keep, because we know that for you, in terms of the economy of the greater city and the greater good, if we have folks with a diploma, they have a much higher chance of not ending up incarcerated. They have a much higher chance of getting employment. And that's what we're finding here and nationally. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Galvin. Ms. Johnson has a question for, she's out, in, out.
Just quickly, does Juneau have a football stadium that belongs to the city?
I don't know that. I
think,
cannot answer the Juneau Douglas High School, I think, might. The new one, I think they've shared for, like, the pool that's out in the valley, the brand new one, they've decided to share. So in order for the high school to be able to use it, they've agreed to offer classes, for example, to all fourth graders. So
So it's a little different, like our pools are owned by the municipality, and so it's a little different model.
It is a different model, and honestly, I didn't ask about that specifically.
And I'm glad to hear that the students, when I was coaching, I had students picking up and cleaning up trails, but it was never an easy, they were not interested. And the smoking areas I did more cleaning than others, but I'm glad to hear that there's a successful movement on that. Thank you.
My understanding is the big cleanup day that happens every spring here is very popular among most schools, especially elementary.
Thank you, Ms. Galvin. Appreciate it. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Janelle Walton. I'm from Fairview District. That's where I live. I have one student who's graduated from Anchorage School District from West High School, and I have currently 2 students in Anchorage School District Elementary and Middle School. Things look very different today than it did a few months ago when I was up here asking for the Assembly to pay for SROs, when there was no support whatsoever. So I'm here asking again, basically because, obviously things did not go well with the Alaska legislature in terms of funding education. And so what I'm here asking for you to do today is to find a way. Just find a way to pay for and help in any way possible. I know that you guys are capped in how much you are allowed to assist our schools. And so what I'm asking is that, these things that we're nitpicking at with the funds for the trails and so forth and the SROs, the reason why these are being picked out is because we're trying to find a way. We're trying to find a way for you guys to help our schools as much as possible, considering the current cap that they're at and considering the way that the Alaska legislature did not support what the parents were asking for. Specifically with the SROs, I really view them as kind of a symbiotic relationship going on between the schools and the community. They're serving the community by being there and being the forefront in stopping crimes from happening, such as the young student that we had at Bartlett who was attacked on her way to school. There was a quick response. When we had a service student who was stabbed more than 70 times, they help out a lot on that way. And then also on top of it, to hear that they're being charged to the school district for 12 months is very frustrating. It tells me that instead of the school district and the municipality working together to try to find a way to help our students, that you're acting as if you're two different bodies trying to figure out a way to charge each other as much as possible. That's how it feels as a parent watching this happen. What I really want to see happening is that you guys just find a way, whatever that way is, whatever nitpicky little things you guys need to do in terms of finding the money based on the cap that you currently have. Find a way to help our students. Find a way to help my students, my children, because I need them to be in a safe place, and I need them to have a classroom that is not overcrowded, because there is not enough teachers in there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Gottstein, welcome.
Good evening. My name is Terry Gottstein. I appreciate this opportunity to testify. I had sent an email with the substance of some of my comments to all of you, but I didn't hear from all of you in response, so I thought I would just come and make sure that my comments were heard. I'm a homeowner, a taxpayer, a parent who had 2 children successfully and happily go through the Anchorage School District and go on to college, and I'm also a small business owner. And I confess that I'm here to testify in my own self-interest. My own self-interest in this case has to do with the kind of community I want to live in. And to me, a cornerstone of that is the type of schools that we have, where every child has an opportunity to get a good public education. In the past several months, we've had to become familiar with an alphabet soup that I didn't know existed, like BSA and SRO. And I thank the powers that be for that opportunity to become educated with that alphabet. I would like to endorse the comments of previous speakers about supporting the SRO. I believe that should be a municipal responsibility. Public safety is a municipal responsibility. Our schools are within the municipality. The previous speaker's discussion about how, as a parent, it just seems to defy common sense that you're trying to figure out who's going to pay for what and all of that. Something like public safety just seems like it should always... When that responsibility was forced on the school district, at that time, it didn't make sense to me, and it still doesn't. I just believe it's a municipal responsibility to take on public safety, and in this case, it will definitely help out the schools. That's the bulk of what I have to say, except that I do endorse the comments of the other speakers about finding a way to get some of this funding into the schools and into the classrooms where it's needed.
Thank you very much. Welcome, sir.
Hello. My name is John Hanrath, and I'm not here about the BSA. I thought that stood for Boy Scouts of America. But I am president of the board for the Alaska Kidney Patients Association, and we advocate for kidney patients, dialysis patients. And the reason I'm here this evening is because we're having kidney patients are having trouble with Anchor Ride getting from and to their dialysis centers. If I've witnessed patients that go in there and trying to get a ride home, and if they're late off their dialysis, they miss the Anchor Ride. And I've witnessed individuals sit there for 2 and 3 hours waiting for another Anchor Ride to pick them up. I don't know what the solution to the problem is. I have some suggestions, but we called the municipality and were informed to come here, testify, tell you that we had a problem because you're not aware of the problem, and answer any questions that you might have. But one of the reasons that the dialysis patients can't, like, for instance, meet the Anchor Ride bus at the time that it shows up is they may have had a problem with their dialysis. They may not have been able to stop the bleeding, so their they can't get on the bus at that time, so they have to reschedule. Well, there's no means to reschedule. You have to call and make another appointment, and they can't make appointments right away. So you'd say to yourself, well, why don't they just take a cab? Number one, they can't afford it because they're on disability, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. But on top of that, if you take a taxi and you're in a wheelchair, taxis can't pick up the wheelchairs. So it's a problem for patients that need help. And so I'm just asking you to consider what might be done, and if you have a work session or whatever it is, we will make ourselves available.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Starr has a question for you.
Well, I guess it's a general comment. We dealt with this in December by appropriating an additional $300,000. There was some pressures that we took on when we raised the fares, but we actually increased the specific program funding to Anchor Rides, so you should be seeing some of a difference now. So my point is that with the extra $300,000 infusion to that program, if that's not what you're seeing, can you please contact me, and I'll follow through on where the appropriation dollars, but we're already into April, so you should start to see that specific focus. So thank you for your comments and your evaluation, but I don't anticipate you'll see any corrections tonight, but the budget monies have already been appropriated at an earlier approval. So
right. Well, I really appreciate that, because we found out as an association 2 weeks ago, and I've had them put together letters of the other problems that they foresee. And we had a work session with the Transportation Department a week ago, and they've made some suggestions. So
fair enough. Yeah, and actually the mayor was the one that moved the program expansion. So we'll liaison with the mayor, but he did a nice job of bringing that to the table in December. So we'll stay with you on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Starr.
Thank you very much, sir.
I appreciate it. Have a great day.
Mrs. Buckendorf, welcome.
Good evening. I'm Valerie Buckendorf, and I'm with Great Alaska Schools, and I'm a resident in South Anchorage. And while I know a few people have spoken about the SROs, or school resource officers, I just wanted to address that a little bit more, and why I feel that it is something that the MOA should really pay for and alleviate some of the burden for ASD. I'm going to stick to my script because I get a little nervous. We feel that this program is very effective at preventing rather than just solving crimes. It keeps our students safe and reduces delinquency and truancy. It's our understanding that ASD currently pays for 9 months of the school year for these SROs, and that's at the cost of $2.25 million. So I think it's really important that we all understand these officers are not security guards and they're not performing school discipline functions, but they are APD officers enforcing criminal laws and protecting about 50,000 of our most vulnerable citizens. The school admin handles internal or discipline or disruptions, but the SROs are handling public safety. I know there's lots of examples about what a great program this is. We've heard a few of them. I want to give one more example. Back in 2009, at a high school party in a warehouse in East Anchorage, 3 students were shot, and one of them was killed. Anchorage homicide detectives worked all weekend to try to find out what happened, but were unsuccessful at getting any information from the student witnesses. When the school started on Monday, 3 students who were at the party were waiting at the SRO's office, waiting to tell what happened at the party. The SRO asked them why didn't they want to tell the police, and they responded that they didn't want to talk to the police. They wanted to talk to the SROs. So even though SROs are just like police officers, drive police cars, and are police officers, in the students' mind, they're viewed a little bit differently. They're less threatening to the students because they've developed these relationships with them, and the kids are willing to talk to them. So the SRO drove the kids to the police station, and once the kids met detectives there, they were comfortable giving them information, and the case was solved. The SROs are that middle piece between students and detectives. They take some of the anxiety out of the process. It's an excellent program, and we don't want to see it go away, but we would also like the municipality to pay for it, since SROs are public safety officers and benefit the whole community by making sure that fewer crimes are committed around schools.
So the funds that are now slated for paying these officers could be used for instruction instead, and it is our understanding that that same amount of money could pay 23 teachers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Say hi to your mom for me.
I will.
Welcome, ma'am. Don't be nervous.
Oddly enough, I'm quite nervous. My name is Heather Beck, and thank you for letting me address you, Mr. Chair. And before I begin, I'd like to express how much I appreciate the opportunity to address you all. My name is Heather Beck, and I teach 8th grade U.S. History and Debate at Golden View Middle School. And it's a little ironic that I'm terrified to be here, but I figured I better walk the talk. So I'm here as a constituent, a taxpayer, a teacher, and a parent to both compliment you as a governing body for having a budget surplus in these economic times and to urge you to use some of that surplus to benefit the Anchorage School District, specifically the middle school model, because the SROs that we've been hammering on is about the same cost to the district as the middle school model is. And middle school is my passion. I've been an 18-year veteran of the middle school. I love those crazy kids, and it's very important to me, which is why I'm here. And I was actually grading papers a few weeks ago, which is why I didn't come earlier. The middle school model has specific benefits to the students that are immeasurably valuable for their education. This weekend, I had the opportunity to bring 8 Golden View students to debate against their fellow school students from 7 different schools across the district. Between rounds, I spoke with some of my colleagues from across the district. We discussed the unfortunate plight of middle schools in Anchorage. While talking, he shared with me that during team planning time, the only real time when the teachers who share the same students have time to talk, that he and his teammates were able to meet with parents of 2 students who were failing both academically and acting out behaviorally. These parents shared family situations that would help explain the behavior of their children and that the 4 teachers in the classroom would not have otherwise known. This model is invaluable because it allows for connections to be made between schools and families. This partnership increases student engagement, attendance, and in turn, achievement. Unfortunately, this is the only model which allows for teachers and students to have substantial time together to allow for enrichment, meaningful integrated instruction, and strong connection between students, teachers, and family. So, thank you again.
Thank you, Ms. Beck. Well done. Welcome, sir.
How's it going?
All's well. Welcome back, actually.
Thanks. My name is Jake Todd, and I really didn't want, there's a lot of other people that need to speak tonight. I speak probably 3 or 4 times a year, so you guys probably know me. But I just have to say that where was I 3 weeks ago? I was doing the things that teachers are supposed to be doing 3 weeks ago. I work 60 hours a week probably, and I get paid for 37 and a half. And I'm totally fine with that, because that's what I have to do. What I'm not fine with is when we keep on seeing cuts to programs that limit the ability of teachers like me, teachers like you've met tonight, to do their jobs effectively, and then we get blamed for seeing any sort of decrease in data. I want you guys to wear what you're going to vote. If you guys are going to vote to defund schools, I want you guys to work that into your platform next time you run for office. You have to wear it. I'm tired of seeing people well, it was a really tough choice, but we had to go with the tennis courts instead. But that's really good for the growth of whatever. I don't care. I'm not a politician. I have at-risk kids in my class. My classes have grown from 20 people in a classroom last year to upwards of 30 this year. And I'm here to tell you that I cannot deliver the services that those kids need. I have to look in their eye and say, nope, sorry, we're out of bus tokens. Oh, you want an orange? That's about all I have in my desk to give you today. We don't get, if they don't have a place to stay, we have one person for them to call for the district. And even that gets lambasted by elected officials in private closed-door meetings. Well, what are they doing taking taxis to school? Well, what if their only safe place to be at night is across town? We have programs for a reason. They're getting cut. And then the people that are doing the cutting don't have any of the responsibility that teachers do. Now, I'm not really so concerned about showing you guys how good of a teacher I am, but I'm worried about not getting my kids across the stage for diploma. Last year alone, I and the graduation coordinator and another teacher ran a program that was accountable for 10% of my high school's graduation numbers. Y'all thought fit, along with the school board, to cut the graduation support coach, a licensed social worker who could do house calls, go wake up kids and bring them to school. Do you think that's happening now? I bet not. But who's going to get blamed for it when we don't have the graduation numbers that were the same as last year? Well, teachers are just lazy. Why don't they work the summertime instead of just taking a vacation? I'm in school during the summer, learning how to do my job better with fewer resources. I ask you, wear what you vote.
Thank you, Mr. Todd. Mr. Todd?
Hi, good evening. Welcome to myself, I guess, and everybody else. I'm a little nervous. Thank you for having this special meeting tonight on the budget. My name is Marilyn Pillafont, and I am a lifelong Alaskan. I attended Anchorage School District schools and graduated from West High School. I recently retired from the Anchorage School District. I was an elementary classroom teacher for 24 years. Now I have the luxury, if you will, and pleasure to be a substitute teacher across the district, and my eyes have been opened. I did my teaching experience all at one school. I had enough variety there to last me my entire career. But I have three things I'd like to just touch on tonight. The subbing experience. Today I was at a school in a second grade classroom with some serious behavior issues in this class. Two of the behavior issues I just really honestly could not manage. One was on a serious behavior management plan, and the other one is just kind of left to go blah, blah, blah around the world and run around the classroom and roll around and do whatever he darn well please. So luckily the office support staff was there and took that issue off my hands so that I was able to focus on trying to teach the curriculum and engage students, the students who were sitting there waiting and really five-star listener, waiting for the directions and trying to answer questions and do their very best and hope to be noticed that they were actually doing what their job was, which was to be at school to learn. They can't do that when you have students who are disruptive. It's insane. This same school is looking at taking 3 second grade classrooms and merging them to 2 third grade classrooms with 10 behavior issues that are serious. I don't know why that's going on. I guess I'd like to have some more information on all of that. Although I'm just a substitute, I'm probably not privy to any of that. Anyway, my concern is for the safety of the students in that classroom who are there to learn and not be hijacked by these behavior students. It's safety. They need those learning opportunities as well, but that setting is not the least restrictive. Secondly, middle school model. I wish the middle school model was around when my youngest son went to middle school. I think had it been available to him, he would not have made some choices and gone down a different road that he did. He's fine now, but nonetheless, it was very troubling. SROs. We've used SROs. I know I'm over time, Mr. Flynn, if you wouldn't mind.
If you don't follow the rules, how can you expect your students to?
Touche. Anyway, please fund the Anchorage School District in any way possible that you can. Our students are begging to be able to learn and not be disrupted.
Thank you. Ms. Beagle, welcome.
Thank you, Assembly. Congratulations to our new Assembly members. Congratulations to everyone in their new positions. My name is Linda Kellen Beagle, and I was going to start this completely differently until Mr. Starr talked, and he asked where folks were 3 weeks ago. Well, where I was 3 weeks ago was looking for school money by contacting my legislature and contacting people in the state, because the public officials from municipality told us to do that. And that includes people on the assembly, and I believe that you made that same comment during an assembly meeting too, Mr. Starr, that if anybody wanted more funding for the schools, they should contact the state. So that's what everybody was doing exactly what we were told. And I'm really offended that you had to mention it like that, because we've all been watching this very closely. Me especially, and you know that, because I've been arguing about these fees that the municipality started paying since 2009. Okay, that's when I started emailing all of you regularly. Some of you weren't even on the assembly at the time, and talking about that. Probably coincidentally, they happened when Mayor Sullivan became the mayor. But that was when we started talking about these fees, and these fees are the tax bill. Printing the tax bill is something that the muni has to do anyway. Adding one line on there talking about the school district taxes, suddenly the school district has to pay half that bill, or the percentage of the bill of what the taxes are. One piece of paper that's going to get printed anyway. Secondly, delinquent taxes. This really gets my goat, because what happens is anytime that there's delinquent taxes, the school district is now required to pay a percentage of those delinquent taxes back to the municipality. Interestingly enough, there's a lot of us who are on payment plans for our taxes that come in after that is calculated. So I'm sure you guys have a plan that after those things are calculated and more money comes in, that percentage goes to the school district? No? Yeah, I didn't think so. Trails. I've been fighting for this since my daughter was in middle school, and she's now a sophomore in high school. Back when everybody when the municipality started requiring the schools to pay for the trails, they weren't paying any money for the trails. The Nordic people were doing it for free, and yet they were charging the school district for use of the trails. As I understand now, there's a memorandum of agreement, but there's still no money exchanging hands. They're still not paying anything for snow removal on the trails, yet the schools are still being charged for that. And then the SROs. Let's get started on the SROs. 9 months of the SROs is what the school district is paying for. Even though they have regular weekly meetings, regular trainings required by the APD, and the school district is paying for those.
Thank you, Mr.
I know I got to go obey the rules now too, but thank you.
Mr. Starr has a question for you, I think.
Oh, who's got a question?
I don't like to debate you. I don't like to debate anybody, but my interest in continuing the debate 2 weeks ago when we were dealing with the school district budget is because nobody showed up. It wasn't a flippant statement. I actually was the only one up here that moved the statement to leave it open because there had to be comments that we needed to hear about. There was 200 positions being cut.
So would you have changed your vote?
I haven't voted.
Okay, but would it have made any difference at all? Because since 2009, none of our testimony has made any difference in your school budget votes.
I'll save it for later, but what also happened in the last several weeks was we had an agreement with the school board leadership, the school superintendent, about how the SRO money was going to come back, in what form it was going to come back. And honestly, I'll save it, but ask Mr. Graff. The first time he testified to us, he had no indication that the SRO return money was going to reinstate teachers. Now I know specifically because he's told me. He told me at the microphone, he told me again later. We've come a long way too, so, it's a work in progress, and I think the idea that there's sort of that friction lobbed up here is because we're trying to get through it. I think several public hearings, I learned my lessons on those conversations. We need to hear from you guys. So when, in fact, 200 teachers or 200 positions were on the block and 3 people showed up, I wasn't comfortable closing out the budget. I moved to postpone it. And that's what happened. And so the idea that we're aggressively, trying to shut down the conversations and move to some sort of solution is not happening. We're open to it. We're hearing it. We've had many, many work sessions. And I'm also getting your leadership at the school board to start to change their mind. SRO money is going to equal teachers. It didn't 2 weeks ago. But thanks for the comments, and keep us accountable. I'm open to that conversation. So you do it well. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you very much. Welcome, sir.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to testify tonight. My name is John Glidden. I have nothing to do with the Anchorage School District except that my wife and my daughter are both teachers.
That's something, sir.
I have, however, worked for 3 universities as a coach, as a teacher, and as an administrator. And I come with a positive note. I don't know if any of you saw the U.S. News and World Report today, but there was a survey of 33,000 schools throughout the United States. And in Alaska, 10 schools, high schools, got a silver medal, and 16 schools got a bronze medal out of 33,000 schools throughout the nation. Now, my background, other than in some collegiate things, was as a drug and gang intervention specialist in Los Angeles. And I have a particular penchant toward cosmology and astronomy. So you can imagine how excited I was when I got to see Wernher von Braun speak personally at Cornell University, when I got to see Carl Sagan speak personally at Cornell University, and when I got to see Stephen Hawking speak personally at Caltech University. But nobody in my entire life has made a greater impression on me than Dr. John Silber, who is the former president of Boston University. And I could never speak as eloquently as John Silber did, but he spoke about the concept of intellectual capitalization. And intellectual capitalization, as he defined it, was that we put our resources toward our children. And that benefits every corporation, it benefits every municipality, it benefits every state, and it benefits our country as a whole. And so I come here to plead with you, not on the behalf of my wife or my daughter, who I see working 60 to 70 hours. I come to plead with you to do whatever it is in your power to grow our children's intellectual capitalization, as John Silber spoke so eloquently of. Thank you again for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you, sir. Welcome.
Good evening. My name is William Hastings, and no, I'm not going to read this whole notebook that I brought up here. It'll be short and it'll be sweet. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. For the last 20 years, I haven't been able to exercise this right as a veteran in the United States Air Force, and I'm thrilled to be here tonight for my first time to be able to talk about something that's near and dear to me. I'm a member of no organization other than I'm a registered Republican and a fiscal conservative. And I may have to repeat that again at the end of this. I'm here to encourage you to make the hard but the right choice to allocate the resources to the Anchorage School District so that they can devote emphasis to early childhood education and other programs. I am prepared for any personal sacrifice. I view the funding of education the same way I view the support this state provides for oil production. They are both strategic investments in the future of this state. I am prepared to not see an immediate return. Pfizer doesn't see an immediate return on a new drug that they are developing. We can pay now for an economic return, or we can cut corners and pay later in the social programs that are a drain on the resources. No one knew, whatever success I've had in life, no one knew what I would do in growing up. They made a leap of faith. They put the resources into my education. Any success I've had, some of it is due to hard work, but a lot of it is due because I've had a very solid educational background. I know you have a very hard choice. I appreciate that. I don't have any specifics on where to allocate money. That's what I elected you for. But I encourage you to do something that I know will be very difficult, but will have real meaning to a future that we all want for this state, and it can't be done by cutting corners. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Seltrig?
Hello.
Good enough, huh?
It's nice to be here this evening, and thank you for taking the time to listen and to consider what needs to be done. I'm going to start out asking what I want, because I have so many things I would like to share with you. I'm worried I won't ask for what I want. And that is, I want you to tax to the cap. I want you to not charge fees for trails, and I want you to pay for the SROs. But I actually want you to do more than that. When you think about our children, they are the most important investment this community has. They really are the future. And when you look at how businesses locate, they locate in places that have great schools. I mean, that's a primary factor. If you look at crime's directly related in many cases to whether or not you graduated from school, whether you were a behavioral problem in school, whether you were bullied in school, that whole beginning. You know, we hear stories of people who were victims of bullying, doing terrible things. So that investment of how we treat our children has everything to do with public safety. It has everything to do with gangs, whether or not children feel like they have a sense of self-esteem or a connection. If you look at prisons are filled in many cases. If you look at the numbers, the chances of you not graduating from high school and going to prison are very high. They increase. If you don't graduate from high school, there's a much higher chance you'll go to prison. All of those things are hugely expensive. Not attracting in business, having children who are troubled as adults, filling prisons, all that stuff costs so much money. When we can pay forward right now in our children and actually begin to transform lives. And so what I'm hoping is that this experience that we're going through now doesn't just result in a budget, but results in a partnership in this community where we work together thoughtfully about bringing not just what we need, but above the average what we need. We need more counselors. We don't need less counselors. We know we have families and kids that don't have a place to live at night, or I have a young, my niece's husband works in the school district, and he deals with several students on a regular basis that we hear about, but not by name at Sunday dinners. He had a student this year whose father was a drug addict. There were guns all over the house. The kid was really appreciative of this teacher, of John, who's a great guy. John cared about this kid. John was worried about this kid even being in the house. They developed strategies for him to go to neighbors' houses or friends' houses because he was afraid that there was going to be a bust and this kid would get shot in it. I mean, this is just one teacher and that I happen to know. We have kids in great peril in this community. We need to step up together and not talk about cuts, but talk about strategies of fully funding what we need to support our schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Seltrig. Good to see you again. Welcome, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Patty Faulkner Hamry. I was born and raised here in Anchorage, Alaska. My dad served on the city council with Mayor Sullivan and back in the earthquake days, and my mother's husband, Barry White, was a signer of the Alaska Constitution. I'm a first grade teacher at Campbell Elementary. Campbell's a very diverse school. The kids in my class, I have a little boy whose mother's Korean. I have a little boy whose mother's Japanese who just got her green card last week. I have 2 children who are Hmong. I have children from Samoa. We are a very diverse community, and I've embraced it in my classroom. I love each one of my children. We have had a displaced teacher in our school because of the rise in PTR that the school district implemented due to the budget cuts. That means that each classroom goes up by 1. And so what that did is it's not a fair allocation of the resource. In primary at Campbell Elementary School, we will all gain 3 to 4 children in our classrooms between K and first grade. And so what that does, as we implement the technology to progress monitor our children, to bring on small group reading, to implement RTI, response to instruction, response to intervention, it makes it harder for us. We don't have Title I resources, but these are the children that I'm committed to teaching, and I will teach as long as I teach in Anchorage. I love living here. I raised my kids here. My daughter's going to get her master's in education on May 23rd, and she has applied to the Anchorage School District. Will she find a job? Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Welcome, Mr. French.
Thank you. My name is Bob French, and I'm speaking for myself. I'm a small business owner, and when we're interviewing new recruits, I'm sad to say that folks from outside are not drawn to come to Anchorage because of our 7 months of winter. The question that we do get is, how good are your schools? I really encourage you to take back the budget items that the Muni used to support for the safety resource officers, for the parks and trails and pools. By reestablishing those budget items back into the Muni's budget, there will certainly be more money available to the people who actually do the job for our kids, and that's the teachers. My business will only be able to recruit and retain talented and enthusiastic people if we have a good quality of life here in Anchorage. And I urge you all to reinvest in our kids' future, in the future of Anchorage, by paying for the programs that the Muni used to support. It will certainly make a difference. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. French. Welcome, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Sarah Krug.
Go ahead and pull that down nice and close.
Okay, is that better? Okay, so I'm the parent of 3 kids in the Anchorage School District, 2 of which I'm sure will be fine no matter what happens because they're pretty smart kids and I'm going to fill in the gaps if they need to be filled in. One of which has cerebral palsy. He needs help with everything except for learning. He's cognitively normal. He needs help to walk, to talk, to eat, everything. He's in a regular first grade classroom, and he has an aide to help him with those physical things. At the school that he's at right now, there's 72 kids in the first grade class. It's split over 3 classes right now. The school is planning on doing 2 classes per grade. I don't think it's possible to put 36 second graders in a class, but even if they split it over 2.5 classes, that's still a big class. Now, there's a lot of things that Zach struggles with to get in and out of the school. He's got to take different paths. He's got to, just to get in and out of the school physically. But in the classroom, he can't use his walker in the classroom for his independence. And it's good for his body too. Think about it. You need to walk every day. It's important because there is not enough room in that classroom. So I want you to just really think about what it's going to look like for some of these kids. Some kids will do fine. They really will. But some kids, they do need the extra attention. Some kids literally need the space. As it is, the classroom isn't big enough. You squeeze more kids, more desks into that classroom, my child loses more independence. He might even lose the ability to continue staying in a regular classroom and getting a diploma. I really want you guys to do everything that you can. I'm trying so hard to understand the finances of it. There's been a lot of people with this movement that have helped me learn a lot of it, and I really hope that it doesn't come down to the city having to see these overcrowded classrooms to really understand what it's going to mean. But just please, as a parent, do everything in your power to divert funding to save our teachers, to keep the classroom sizes small, because Zachary deserves to be in a classroom and get a diploma. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Welcome, ma'am.
Not a ma'am yet. My name is Bridget Galvin. I am a junior at Stellar Secondary School, which is a local school here. Not a ma'am yet, yeah. So I wasn't planning on speaking, but I was kind of disheartened by hearing some of the testimony. So I'm here to say that I'm a little concerned. I'm concerned that my own city's assembly may not be looking for any possible way to help our schools. The schools that got my brother to college, the schools that got me socially, emotionally, and intellectually ready to become an adult, the schools that are still working for my little brother to just be just as ready as I am. The schools teaching and counseling the future doctors, co-workers, and leaders for me. The schools that need our help, that need your help. And maybe it's just easier for me because I'm a student and I see that need every day. But trust me, as someone who lives in that need every single day, we really need it. We really need your help. So please show my fellow students that our city truly does value education and truly does value every single student. Every single student. And look in your heart and try to find any possible way that you can help our districts. Thank you.
Ms. Galvin, I have a question. Have I seen you sitting in a chair a lot like this one once upon a time?
Yes.
Just curious.
Yes. I am here with Great Alaska Schools as well as the founder of Students with a Voice, which did produce a video called Grovel to Grovel, which you may have seen.
I saw that one. Nice to see you, Ms. Galvin.
Nice to see you too. Thank you.
Welcome, ma'am.
Hi, thank you. My name is Tiffany Windsor, and I'm here to repeat pretty much everything that you've heard on the Anchorage School District. And I brought with me my two children. I have a middle school student and an elementary student. And you've heard from teachers, counselors, pretty much all walks of life. But I'm offering, against their best wishes, I'm offering, if you want to hear from my kids, how your decisions will personally affect them. My junior high student flourishes at his school, and he's in a middle school program. And he, tomorrow, is going to accept his National Junior Honor Society Award. And that is because of that program, because of those dedicated teachers, and because of the opportunities that are presented to him right now. However, those programs right now are being threatened. Teachers are being taken away. They're talking about bringing back the junior high model. And my youngest son won't have that opportunity. And I know as a parent, and only a parent can understand their own children to the extent that I can, that without the middle school program, he wouldn't be accepting that award tomorrow. It wouldn't happen. He needs that guidance. He needs those mentors. He needs that support. And I know my son's not the only one. So I'm asking you to resonate on everything you've heard from everybody tonight. SROs, trails, whatever it is, whatever you guys need to hash out to make it happen so our teachers aren't affected, so the programs get to remain, so the middle school program can remain, because those students need it. And if you have questions for my son, who is in the program rather than the parent just pleading and asking, ask him. Ask my 6-year-old who's been sitting there listening to every one of these people. Ask him. Ask him if he wants to be overcrowded. Ask him if he wants to be the kid sitting in the back of the classroom with 30-plus kids raising his hands, but the teacher doesn't have time for him. Ask my junior high student if he wants to lose the opportunities that he had this year and just be 1 in 1,000. I went to Hanchu Junior High. I had an okay education. I did well. But I didn't have mentorship. I didn't have guidance. I just showed up. I just went to school, and it was my own accord and my own willingness to push myself that I was able to do okay. But there's a lot of kids that don't have that drive or the support structure at home to be self-driven. And that middle school program keeps kids on track. If you look at the stats, they're doing excellent. And don't take it away, please.
Thank you, Ms. Windsor. Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Susan Ritter, and I am a teacher, special ed teacher. I'm a parent of a graduate from West High School. I've heard wonderful testimony. I agree with all of my previous speakers about supporting education and using the funds that have been made available to support our schools. I also want to ask that each of you in your own area of your city look to the potential waste of money that has to be happening that could probably be stopped. And I'll give you an example. In my little neck of the woods, I live on a little road called Summers Place. And in the winter, the road is very icy, and we had somebody come up, the sander came up and sanded the road, and we were all so happy. And then the next day, the grader came up and graded all the sand away, and we were not so happy. And one of my neighbors ran out and said, "What are you doing?" And the gentleman said, it was the same gentleman who had sanded the road the day before. He said, "I'm just following orders." And I just see that as a tiny example of waste. Maybe a big example of waste, but there's got to be a way to look at all of our departments that are in the city, not looking at the engineering departments, looking at I don't know what other departments you have. You'll have lots of departments, but really taking a look at things to see where the spending can be saved, and asking your employees to see where they can find extra monies, because there's got to be more than just that one example I've given of sanding and then grading the same road, and then it's still an icy road. So thank you very much. And please support our schools, because our kids deserve it, and that's what makes a great community.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Johnson has a question for you.
Oh. You're speaking my tune. I've been trying for quite a long time to get shared services. So things like plowing could be done maybe effectively between the two school district and the municipality. And I have to tell you that this budget surplus has come about because there have been some departments that actually have managed their budget, and these are savings. And one of them actually was Public Works. Granted, we didn't have the snow we usually have, but I just wanted you to know that there has been savings this year.
No, I understand. I just, this poor guy, this was a private road, or it's a public road, but that he was sanding one day and grading it the next day, and all our neighbors were just up in arms.
Yeah,
thank you.
And thank you for the example, because I think we all see things like that, and I appreciate your comments.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Welcome, ma'am. Anyone else who wants to get in line, you're welcome to come on down.
Somebody, please. I didn't want to be the last one, and I wasn't planning to do this. Up until 3 years ago, I lived in New Jersey. I'm from outside, started in Washington, D.C. When we moved up here, our friend said, "What in the world are you doing moving north to retire instead of south?" From the time we moved in, I felt like people were doing PR for the state of Alaska. I have never met so many friendly, helpful people since we moved here into Anchorage. And so but 3 weeks ago, I was not part of an informed electorate. Thanks to the Greater School, the committee that has been putting this forth, I have become informed. And though my heart is beating, I just wanted to stand up here and say, I don't want to berate you all for what you are not doing. I just want to tell you that I don't want to live outside. I want to live here. I want to live in a great place that it is, and I don't think that any of you, want this not to be the great place that it has been, and that you know that schools are very important. I had a friend who was part of the Gray Panthers. This is a long time ago. He as a senior citizen, would speak to his senior friends to say, it's very important that we support bond issues. I know you don't have any children in the school district anymore, but it's very important that we support these bond issues because we want to live in a good neighborhood. We don't want our house values to go down because we don't have good schools. So all of that put together, I know that you'll make the right decisions because you must be proud to live here too, just as I am so happy to be a part of Anchorage. And amen.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Michelle Terinsky. I wasn't planning to speak either, so I apologize if this is rather discombobulated. I've lived here since 1971. I attended ASD schools 1st through 12th grade, and I received an excellent education. I've watched a lot of gavel to gavel the last couple of weeks, and I was rather astounded at what I felt was a lot of negativity from the legislature towards Alaska schools and school systems. There was a lot of talk about accountability and improving outcomes. And while I agree the system isn't perfect, I think that we can say that we have more successes than failures. I definitely don't understand their reasoning that how they think that we can improve outcomes with less funding. I think it's shameful that parents, teachers, administrators have to year after year beg for school funding. I think we need to ask ourselves if we really want to live in a community that doesn't have strong schools. Strong schools benefit all of us. So I'm asking you tonight to do whatever we can do as a community to support our schools, waive fees, raise taxes, whatever it takes. You know, I sit here looking at all this energy in this room and all the energy that's gone into the last few months. And I just think, what could we do if we could channel all of this energy towards improving our schools rather than fighting for funding? Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Welcome, sir.
Good evening, sir. My name is Samuel Moore. I wasn't planning on speaking tonight, but if everyone could hold their applause to the end. I've heard a lot of anecdotal stories tonight. Everyone has heard of a story of a way to spend money. You know, everyone has a bleeding heart story of ways to spend money. We're here tonight because we found several $1 million because of Mayor Dan Sullivan's solid leadership. Again, that was Mayor Sullivan's leadership. He's not looking at me. We have this money, and I want to urge you guys to stick to your budget. Stick to your budget. We don't need to spend this money on anything. Everyone up here has been talking about the BSA and state spending, school board spending. People are complaining about issues that have nothing to do with what we're here for tonight anyways. Just don't spend the money. Stick to your budget, and that's all I have to say. Thank you. Hold your applause.
Welcome back, sir.
Hi.
Good to see you again.
Good seeing you. My name's Ed Larrabee, and I'm a property owner, and yes, I do pay, I think it's a large property tax, and all I have to say basically is I've been living there for 20 years. I've had my taxes go up 4 times. I mean, 4 times what I originally paid when I first bought the place in '93. And it's time for us not to dump the problems of the community on top of the property owners. If you really want to do something, get rid of the property tax and have a sales tax to take its place, not both. Therefore, we can take this to a vote and see if we want to raise our taxes to support our schools. I think it's a great idea for the surplus money, by the way, to go towards our schools because, you know, the kids are important. But to dump it all on a property owner, that's not right. It should be spread out. And that's basically what I want to say. Share the pain with the benefits, and get rid of the property tax. Let the sales tax take its place. I know you like that, And, or else, when you do run again, as that one gentleman said, make sure you tell us that you raised our property tax. Put that in your advertisements. And maybe next time, some that were not opposed or were not challenged in their race will be challenged. Matter of fact, maybe I'll run against them. And that's basically it.
Thank you, Mr. Litterby.
Thank you. You all have a wonderful summer.
And you as well, sir. Welcome, ma'am. If anyone else wants to speak, hop on up here.
I'm sorry to be the one more. I wasn't planning on speaking tonight either, but the issue of taxes has come before you. I just want to say I have been in Alaska 40 years.
What's your name?
Oh, my name is Pat O'Hara.
Thank you, Pat.
I have been in Alaska 40 years. I was a teacher for 23 years, both at the high school and college level. I also was for 12 years on a school board out in the Matanuska Valley. I am well aware of the issues that face education. But before Alaska, I grew up in California, where the schools were excellent, some of the best in the country. I had nothing but public school all the way through college when University of California was free, except for a $100 registration fee. So I was able to work my way through. It made me who I am today, successful and happy. But what I'd like to say is, when I was growing up in California, in a working class town, by the way, my dad was very working class, there was a kid up the street named Steve Jobs, who also went to the same public schools I did. And he worked in his garage for a little bit and came up with the desktop computer. And of course, he turned that area into the most wealthy area of the country right now, where there are still excellent public schools. And the guy that worked with him was named Paul Wozniak. He still lives in that same town where I grew up, and his kids go to the public schools there, as well as some other names you might recognize, because they are that good. And that small town where I grew up has taxed itself above and beyond the state level of funding for several years now to support its schools, because California has financial difficulties, unlike Alaska, and they couldn't support the schools to the level which the people wanted. So they have consistently overpaid for their schools. They do not send their kids to private schools. They do not put public money into private schools. They fight for their public schools, and it has been a huge economic engine. I personally think our schools are wonderful. I don't know why anybody would complain. We have so many strengths in these schools, and some things that might be considered weaknesses, like the 90 some odd languages that are spoken, are actually strengths. I also have a daughter who's currently a teacher. I can't reveal where she teaches, but she has kids from all over the world, as well as various areas of Anchorage. She loves those kids, and the thing she tells me is, you would not believe the essays I receive on what it's like to see snow for the first time. So these are incredible strengths. I said, you need to publish these things. I was also a journalist for a long time. So I would like to encourage a strong working relationship between this body and the school board. And I know it isn't always so. I know that there are stresses and animosities. I would also like to encourage a united front to the state legislature that doesn't seem to think schools are that important. At least that is my perception. Anyway, thank you for your time.
Thank you, ma'am. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me. My name's Lori Pickett, and I am the mother of 2 children in the Anchorage School District. And I am in complete agreement with all the other parents who have spoken, and advocates and teachers, for the importance of putting funding into education. My day job, I work with adults, and one of the most just heartbreaking statistics, I work with adults in literacy, is that the number of prison beds are predicted based on 3rd grade reading scores. Everybody in the correction system knows the way to predict the future is by 3rd grade reading scores. Let's invest in our children now so we don't have to invest in them later. And then one other point that wasn't brought up, that I look around this room, I recognize a lot of these moms, some of the dads, and I don't want you to think we're not doing our part. Because at about the 13th or 14th of this month, when I was doing my taxes, and I looked at all my receipts, I'm thinking I put $2,000 into my kids' public education. 7 pizzas here, money for soup there, $500 donation dollars here and there, and I look around this room, these women, these men, these teachers, they're the ones putting on the events. They're the ones donating. We are doing our part. I spent over $400 just for my kids to play a couple sports. So I want to make it clear that we're not just asking you to give us money, but we are putting our money into. And we know there are kids who cannot afford to go on that field trip unless parents fundraise, unless parents put money in. So please, it's not just that we're up here begging, we're putting in, and you can be creative in how you put in as well. And I appreciate you listening to all of our comments. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Welcome.
Maybe I really will be the last one. My name is Megan Rashat, and my family and I moved to Anchorage in September from the bush for your schools, for our schools. And I've been involved with the Great Alaska Schools Anchorage group for the last 3 months. This is an inspiring group of people, and we are not going anywhere. We're staying in Anchorage. We're staying around the state, and we really do want the best schools that we can have for our students here and around the state, and you're a big part of that in Anchorage. These millions of dollars that we're talking about, that you're talking about, will make a huge difference for the Anchorage School District. So I ask you to reflect really carefully on those decisions and what those things mean to our students and our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Griffin.
Howdy, I'm Bob Griffin. I serve on the Budget Advisory Commission, but I'm representing myself today. Sorry for the informal address. I'm also a small business owner and attending to a few things today. I just wanted to clear up a few points, and I'm going to go zero to walk in about 10 seconds here on a few notes that I've taken while I've been sitting in the audience. There seems to be a really strong feeling that there's some sort of correlation between spending money on K-12 education and outcomes in K-12 education, and the data would indicate otherwise. A good example, on the latest publishing from the NEA's rankings and estimates, Florida was 47th in per capita spending on K-12 education, yet they were first in low-income fourth grade reading. By this March 2014 study showed that Alaska was number 1 in per capita spending in K-12 education, and we were 51st in fourth grade reading for low-income kids, just slightly behind the kids in Washington, D.C. Now, just to cover a couple other things to benchmark against, since the National Assessment of Educational Progress is the only thing that we really benchmark ourselves against other 50 states, even though our rate of increase in spending is only second to Wyoming over the last 10 years, from 2003 to 2014 NAEP test scores, and this is just for upper and middle income kids, we've gone from 44th to 49th in fourth grade reading. We've gone from 39th to 44th in fourth grade math. We've had some improvement in eighth grade reading. We've gone from 47th to 42nd, and we've gone from 31st to 34th in eighth grade math. I would argue that our system doesn't really necessarily need more money infused to it, but we do need to focus on reforms and benchmarking and looking what other states and municipalities have used to achieve better student outcomes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Griffin. Welcome, ma'am.
You're going to have to keep me standing up because I get awful nervous here. I'm Catherine Hicks, and I was working out in the yard and listening to the radio, and I just got pretty upset at what I was hearing, so I had to come down here. After the goat rope that occurred in the legislature, I can't believe that we're wanting to spend more money. Thank goodness the Senate's got a little bit of brains and a little bit of control over what happens in the legislature. We just had an election where every bond major except one passed. This state and the municipality are spending money we don't have. Revenue sharing is going down and will continue to do so until we are allowed to develop our resources. We can't count on the 70% state funding that these bonds always brag about. And you want to spend more? We don't need more spending on education. We rate down close to the bottom in results and close to the top in spending. I went down to the Great Alaskan Schools Rally Saturday, and it was just horrible to see how this education system has brainwashed their students. I had to leave after they buried education. What a fraud. The legislature didn't cut education. When did a raise in BSA constitute a cut? Only government and school districts can believe this, and they're educating our kids. I would be embarrassed if I were the parents of these students. It is now evident why ASD doesn't want school choice. They are afraid that students may develop a mind of their own. Now, this is stuff it seems to me that most ASD folks want to get more and are willing to do less. This seems to be a good reason to combine services like plowing and the shared services that Ms. Johnson was talking about. Very good idea. We could let private business contract for them, and that would save a lot of money. I don't think we need tennis courts or any new public facilities at a time like this. And I would like to hear from the previous businessman that testified and answered, and see how he answered when they asked, what are the schools like up there? He never gave us his answer. I'd like to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hicks. Come on down, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Andrea Cordano. I am a member of Great Alaska Schools, and I have an interesting educational background, and I've had the opportunity to teach kindergarten through 12th grade students and also graduate classes at UAA, and I was also hired one year to teach developmental ed, which were the students who came through the schools across the state that were not quite prepared for the University of Alaska. So I have a broad background, and I spent 3 years in graduate school working on data and research too, and I understand data to a certain extent, but I also know that it depends on how you look at it, how recent it is, how they run the averages. Years ago, I was part of a genetic study on dyslexia. We'd been working on this data for 5 years, finally found someone out in California with a big enough computer to get the results that we wanted. And Bruce Pennington got a lot more grants after that. But so some of the information I've heard about our schools is that we have 50% of our kindergartners begin school underprepared, but at 8th grade, our reading scores are above the national average. And when you look at preschool data from years ago, the Perry Preschool Project in Michigan, where I'm from, they didn't get the results they needed in 3rd grade. With the students that had preschool, they had to wait till 8th grade and beyond. And it's really difficult sometimes. There was a new study that came out in the end of 2013 that averaged prison costs versus graduation rates. And what they came up with is for the state of Alaska raised our graduation rates 5%, we would save over $600,000 a year in terms of prison costs. It costs about $50,000 a year. And there is a correlation. I don't want to go on any further, but there are a lot of good things happening in our school, and you really need to look at the whole picture of the data, and depending on who you are. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Welcome, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Gretchen Stoddard. My son is in 7th grade at Golden View. I was not planning on testifying tonight, but I listened to some of these and I wanted to. I live on Seawind Drive. My son likes school. He's in 7th grade, and I am here because I hope his school next year looks similar to what it does. I am concerned. I know you don't make the decisions on teachers, this, that, but I'm concerned his school next year won't be like it is this year. I did hear some discussions here about benchmarking and state rankings and this and that. I think there are a lot of things in the state of Alaska that are expensive. If we didn't drill oil wells that cost more per foot, we'd have a lot of problems. Alaska is expensive. Some of the things are expensive. it does not shock me that we spend a lot, whether it's bridge per foot, road per foot. If we're going to benchmark schools, I'd really love to benchmark all kinds of things related to government spending. But thank you very much. I think your schools work. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Welcome, Mrs. von Imhoff.
I am Natasha von Imhoff. I am on the Anchorage School Board. Thank you very much for having this special meeting today and listening to all our testimony. And thank you for looking for ways to help fund the Anchorage School District, whether it be allocating new funds or reducing expenses attributed to ASD. As the chair of the School District Audit and Budget Committee, I will be bringing forth for consideration by our board suggestions of how to best invest and allocate our district's precious resources. By looking at the empirical data and studying best practices around the country, there appears to be a path emerging where particular investments are found to produce better outcomes for students. But it's not just any one place. It's a combination of places, when working together in harmony, can improve academic results for students. So the consensus that are emerging is keeping class sizes manageable, particularly in the elementary school, by addressing the pupil-teacher ratio inside the classroom and keeping it as low as affordable does directly impact the student experience. Pre-K and early literacy, kids who participate in preschool programs come to kindergarten ready to read. This gives them a major head start compared to their peers, and it is the biggest bang for your buck, so to speak. Summer school and extended day learning. When we looked at the state of Massachusetts and Florida, both who are leaders in the NAEP scores, both states have identified that their education priorities include extended day tutoring, so that's after school, where they have one-on-one or low student counts to one teacher, or summer school. Both have been proven to raise NAEP scores. When you have limited resources, it comes down to looking at which programs or allocation has the greatest positive impact for students. And we at ASD are committed to being accountable for our decisions and monitoring our investments so you, the Assembly, and the citizens of Anchorage can be confident that our board and our administration are being good stewards of our public funds. Thank you.
Mrs. von Imhoff has a couple of questions for you, sorry. Mr. Starr?
It's apparent that the conversations tonight have a little more emotion in them than typical when we're talking about our operating budget, and I appreciate that. This is my 7th time. If I was able to approve your budget here a couple weeks ago, it would have been my 7th approval of the budget, 6 out of 7, I'll put it to you that way. I voted no sometime back in the past. We need to do a better job at this, but our opportunity to dialogue has to be very sophisticated. It isn't a quiz, it's an opportunity for us to understand this dialogue between what your group does at the school board level and what our group does here. We're not doing very well at that. We need to have interactions that are that. We've talked about time and time again to have a 6-year forecast. What does your budget look like to us, even making anticipations of tax increases, even assuming that costs are going to go up? Tell us what it looks like so we can anticipate it, as opposed to getting it put into our lap 3 weeks ago and having to decide that. What does it take, Natasha, Ms. von Imhoff, to get that message to you that that's helpful data for us to see what's out there?
Well, to answer that a couple ways. First, we meet 4 times a year, both boards, and we have tried to up our game, so to speak, in the last 18 months in terms of having a much more comprehensive PowerPoint presentation, much more data to present, and much more detailed financial information. We also, at the same time, have tried to do a 3-year forecast. I understand that you've asked for 6. I do have documents that I believe that were emailed to you today. I have a copy in my chair that does provide a 6-year forecast. The 3-year forecast that we've been presenting you seems, in our mind, just to be a slightly more accurate, simply because we have 8 contracts that we negotiate with, and they're all in 3-year cycles. So to have anything beyond that is a little bit stepping into the void.
I agree, and I have your 6-year plan or your 3-year plan. And again, I'll criticize it because this seems to be the only opportunity we have to do it. You're, again, in years 2 and 3 and your out years, you're anticipating that funding will be flat at our level as well. We increase our taxes every year. That hasn't been the history of what this body has done for the school board. So why bring me a plan that shows flat funding out there? Put it out there, anticipate a tax increase, and then I'm not surprised by it when you do that. And this is a friction-driven statement for me, but it's time to talk about it. And you guys have to understand the budget like we understand our budgets. And I'm not trying to understand your budget. Why is your debt service $2.7 million higher than it was last year if you guys retire bonds at the same level as we renew them? I've got to have answers like that, and you should have those answers before they come to us. $2.7 million is almost as much as the SRO. Why is your debt service $2.7 million higher than last year? Why is it $85 million last year and $87 this year? I don't know the answer to that. I haven't had a platform to ask it. But it's vital that you guys flesh that stuff out before we see your budgets. Ms. Finhelm, you've got to do that kind of work. I need that help. I can't do it by myself. What is the answer to your debt service? Why is it $2.7 million higher?
I don't want to venture a guess at this time or an answer at this time. I would like to converse with my cohorts, and one of us will get back to you in short order.
Why did Ravenwood and Alpenglow Elementary lose 2 teachers each in their elementary staffing than that? The answer came to me, but I still didn't hear it clearly. What are you going to do with the Juneau money down in Juneau? We heard the work session on Friday says you're not certain that you're going to reinforce teachers in the classroom. When will these policy statements be gelled to a point where the school board understands it? I got to have the answers. I need to have the answers. I want to speak eloquently, but with passion like everyone spoke to me. When are we going to get those answers? When are you going to Juneau appropriate? When are you going to put classroom teachers back in there? And tell me now, not later.
Mr. Starr, I'm sorry I have to intercede here because there's a couple of folks who have questions for Ms. Von Imhoff. Mr. Graff, can I get back to you in a couple of minutes?
Certainly.
Thank you very much. We'll hold that question. Sorry, Ms. Von Imhoff. Ms. Johnston?
And actually, this I just came to this new white.
Hold on one second here. We're getting into debate here.
I have a question.
Okay, let's finish up public testimony. We'll bring them back up. Is that okay?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's a question for them.
All right. Does anybody wish to testify under public testimony before we get into the discussion? All right. We got a couple more, and then we'll wrap it up. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. I'm sorry I overdressed tonight, but I didn't plan on speaking like everybody else. But I do have some things that I'm not sure people who are not in the classroom every day that they don't realize.
Ma'am, we need your name. I apologize. We need your name. If you could just tell us who you are.
Janice Crutchfield.
Thank you, Ms. Crutchfield. Go ahead.
I hold a couple positions in the community, all working with advocacy and advocacy for children especially. And I'm a huge advocate for children. I have to say, I'm not sure people realize what it takes to educate a child with special needs. Maybe only the parent knows. But I work in a facility where the children, they go to school in my facility. And I'm very proud of where I work for the school district for 20 years. And I've worked with special education, and it's not getting easier. The children are not getting easier to work with. I call it the bob and weave. If a child's mad and they don't want to do yet another testing, they might throw a chair, they might throw a table, they might overturn me or something else. But I tell you, I wake up every morning so happy that I'm going to work. I love what I do, and I love the children. But one child might have occupational therapy, speech therapy, physical therapy, adaptive PE. That child deserves an education. Whatever it costs, that child has every right to be at school and be learning, unlike 50 years ago where that child would be kept at home. Our children all have the right to an education. We don't have the right to determine they're going to be an assembly person, they're going to be the mayor, they're going to be whatever. We don't have that question in us at all. All we want is that children to know the basics so that should they get out of our facility and go to a regular school, they'll be able to compete with the rest of the kids. I believe all children deserve that. All children. When the No Child Left Behind came about, that's when the money started getting harder. That's when we were getting children that we didn't need those kind of services for. Now we do. And I'm really happy to say all parents with special needs kids are happy to be able to send their kids if they can get educated in the Anchorage School District. Yes, it does cost more. The governor wants to see more bang for his buck. Come where I work for a day. When a year ago a child couldn't even read at a first grade level, and they're in 6th grade, and in 1 year now they're up to 3rd grade level. That's a huge accomplishment, and it's because of all the services that we are able to provide. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Winfield. Welcome, sir.
Hi, thank you. My name is Dan Windsor. I am the 21-year husband to that smoking hot woman back there that came up earlier. I can't imagine the weight that sits on your shoulders and having to appropriate funds that are going to benefit the future of our kids. Assemblyman Starr, you asked some great questions, and me, as I witnessed the testimony, I got to say, the majority of the testimony in support of appropriating more money to the school district, I'm pleased to hear that. But at the same time, I also understand the need that we need to manage our money better. I see quite a bit of, I don't want to call it infighting, but a bit of siloed effect that doesn't work in business, and it shouldn't work in government either. Mr. Starr, you bring us some great points. I think all of you and the school administrators should take a break from all of the infighting and the he says, she says, and the I want my money, I want to keep my money, and I don't want to give you any more money. Look, the kids are the ones that are going to benefit from this, and in the long term, it's going to be our community that's going to benefit from well-educated kids. Our businesses are going to be better, and quite frankly, we just need to siloed models don't work in business, and they're not going to work in government. So I really encourage you to take Assemblyman Starr's lead on working together and communicating better with both parties so you guys can come to an agreement and make sure that the kids don't suffer. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Windsor. Anybody else? Anyone at all? Seeing here and no one. Public hearing is now closed. Mr. Trainee?
Move 2014 49S, excuse me, 94S.
There's,
First one.
can you push the button, Mr. Trainee? Moved and seconded. I sort of interrupted some discussion in order to finish public testimony. Mr. Starr, did you want to follow up on your question with Mr. Graff and Ms. Vonimhoff?
I don't mind. You can certainly do it. It came out like a lecture, but, you know, the idea that, you know, we are doing hard work up here is what we need to do, but I think we need to get through the 17 amendments as we go.
Okay. Ms. Johnston, do you have anything you need to cover before we proceed with amendments?
No, I can do it as we do amendments. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Trainee.
Let's move amendment number 1. It's in your packet. The amount is $163,424. Provide funding for 2 full-time senior code enforcement officers, increasing from 1 part-time with transportation inspection to increase the safety and welfare of the regulated vehicle customers. Source of funding is fees. Is there a second? There was a second from Mr. Honeman on it.
Correct.
Do you remember back when we redid the tax ordinance, we promised the industry if we raised the fees, we'd give them the 2 inspectors. This completes the promise we gave them. That's all, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Domboski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for Mr. Musser, if he's present.
Mr. Musser, I saw you earlier.
I didn't. Mr. Vacalis, I could ask you the question, if I may, Mr. Chair. I just want to ensure this is consistent from my memory with what we had passed previously. Mr. Vacalis, when do you think we could get this position filled? I know employee relations is kind of backed up a little, but when do you think we could get the person on the road if this passes?
The reason that no action has been taken yet is we're waiting for the budget to be set. So, once a budget is approved, then we'll go ahead and start the process. We've got the job descriptions written up and everything ready to go. So, that does take some while for classification, but, our biggest hang-up was just getting a budget so that we could start the process.
So we could expect one in the next couple of months.
That's probably a pretty good assessment.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Domboski. Ms. Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say that this is a position, well, two positions that were basically promised when we were dealing with the taxi cab ordinance, and that's why I brought this forward along with Mr. Trainee, and I'm hopeful that my colleagues will remember what we promised and support this amendment as submitted. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Gray Jackson. Mr. Vacalis, follow up.
Yes, thank you very much. So if you look at the S version, you'll see in there that there is a change. Previous budgets had a 0.5 inspector. The budget then that's found in the S version shows a 1.5, so there's been an increase of 1. I think what Mr. Trainee and Ms. Jackson talking about really is the 2. And so if you went with what this amendment shows now, you're definitely overfunding compared to what the S version shows. In fact, you're overfunding by quite a little bit. So what would be more appropriate if your concern is the 2 inspectors, if that's what your concern is, then the 59,532 would be the right number probably. Only.
Ms. Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, and if I can address Mr. Vacalis' comment, Mr. Chairman. So what you're saying is the amount, in order to fund 2 code enforcement positions, that the only amendment that we need here is the 59,532 and not the 90,372. Is that what you're saying?
Through the chair, yes, ma'am, because in the S version it shows 1.5.
Okay.
And what you, if you want to bring it to 2, if that's what your intent is, then the 59,532 does that, I think.
That's the intent. Thank you, Mr. Vacalis. Mr. Chairman, if I may,
please.
I would like, since this amendment has been brought forward fully, I'd like to move to delete the 90,372 from this amendment, Mr. Chairman. And if I could have a second, I'd be happy.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is there any objection to the amendment
I have one. Well, I don't have an amendment. I mean, I want to talk about it.
Okay. You want to speak to the amendment, Mr. Starr?
Only clarity, and Marilyn, I told you that I wouldn't put you on the spot here, but the S version changes in the municipal manager's header only goes up by about $25,000. So if what Mr. Vacalis said is true on the full-time position added into the S version, why isn't the S version changing more of the municipal manager's budget?
But through the chair, if I could answer that, because in the budget it called for one additional full time. In other words, when
in
we
which
came,
budget, Mr. Vacalis?
in the first quarter budget revision, it called for 1.5 persons, okay, as opposed to the 0.5 that they currently had. It did not put in a full 2. It was 1.5, and what this did was also adjust, the S version adjusted it so that it also was allowed to bring in a vehicle to support the additional personnel.
Okay, I'll go with that, but the $264,000 that we have in the December budget funds a certain amount of transportation inspection services, so my concern is that the reduced amount isn't going to be enough based on what Ms. Gray Jackson's now reduced it to. So I'll believe that your intent is there, but you may have to pull it out of the original December 2013 budget approval to make it all work.
So if you, here's how I see this thing laying down. If you went ahead and put in the 59 and change that's here.
I'm with you.
Plus, if you include in that the S version, which adds the transportation requirement for a vehicle, in the original first quarter budget revision, it had a 1.5 person. So your only deficit was the 0.5 and the short funding for a vehicle. Is that?
It does, but are both of them, the vehicle, is that going into your budget, or is that going into somebody else's budget?
It goes into the transportation inspector's budget, but that's part of my
I understand
overall.
that. Okay. I get it. I just didn't, you're referencing another S version, and that was really the original budget that we presented, so I was confused a little bit by that. So the S version is the one we're in front of tonight, the original submitted first quarter budget. Thank you. I'll support it. I think it's correct. Thank you.
So is there any objection to the amendment Seeing and hearing none, the amendment as amended is before us. Any further comments? Let's go ahead and vote, please.
Mr. Honeman?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
So that passes unanimously. That brings us to amendment number 2. Mr. Trainee.
Amendment number 2, its amount is $8,850. Was requested by Assembly Council. Support funding of special counsel retained by the Assembly for Earhart versus MOA, remand under Superior Court Order 12-6917.
You push your button, Mr. Trainee.
Sorry. There. Basically, we're under court order to conduct this, and this just pays the cost of the attorney for it, sir.
Are there any questions on that one? Okay, let's go ahead and vote. Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Honeman?
Yes.
That passes unanimously. Mr. Starr?
Amendment 3 is an adjustment to the municipal attorney's budget of $175,000.
Care to make a motion? Thank you, sir. It's moved and seconded. Is there discussion?
Really not much. I think it's just what we do here at the first quarter budget is we tweak things that weren't particularly correct at the end of last year. So the only question I had was actually from Ms. Mahoney herself as to why this wouldn't go into the utility budget of ML&P. But Mr. Wheeler kind of clarified that, so I'm happy to move it. And it may be excess, but I think we got enough.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Starr. Ms. Johnston?
Could you, is there any reason you could share with any of us that why this isn't coming out of ML&P's budget?
Through the chair, Ms. Johnston, there are a number of issues in here that are more related to the MOA's ownership interest versus a ratepayer interest. So the thought was we'd be better off starting here, so that's taxpayer-based funding versus ratepayer-based funding. If we need to IGC that at some point, we can do that.
Okay. Is this something that we're doing with others?
Yes. If you look at the last line of the description, a new lawsuit was filed last week, and it involves what I'd call a subsidiary of Homer Electric that is suing us and the other utilities regarding transmission of power. So, yes, we are participating with others in that litigation.
Okay, so to me it's okay. I'm for it. Thank you.
Mr. Steele.
Yes. I guess my question is also for Mr. Wheeler. Is this going to help us at all with any of the contract legal help that we have? We seem to have quite a bit of contract legal help in the moment.
Through the chair, Mr. Steele, typically ML&P has available to it regulatory counsel, attorneys who are engaged to represent ML&P in front of the Regulatory Commission of Alaska and in other capacities. But in this particular case, that counsel they normally use is conflicted out, so we need to acquire other counsel. So I don't know if that answers your question about how this helps, but we need to hire counsel for this case.
Excuse me. This is for the additional specific issue that we have with Homer Electric?
Through the chair, Mr. Steele, no, that's a little bit broader than that. We have some other issues regarding independent power producers and generation and transmission, and to the extent that we need assistance analyzing those requests and applications, we need to have this funding available to us.
Thank you.
Seeing no one else in queue, please vote.
Excuse me, this is Lucinda. I have a question.
I'm sorry. Ms. Mahoney, We'll go ahead and stop voting. Ms. Mahoney, you had a comment?
Yes, I just want to ask the Assembly through the chair, when you appropriate this through fund balance, the way we set up the original AM was some of the fund balance went to the MOA trust and some of it went to the trust reserve. So do you know which reduction you are taking this from?
Thanks for that, Ms. Mahoney, and I talked to Marilyn. I'll refer to that because we talked a lot in the last couple of days. So I will actually clarify that, and we're going to need to do that for all the amendments. I got them yesterday and wasn't able to contact the members to clarify that. So in this particular case, I would say that the funding source then instead of fund balance is going to have to be the MOA trust. So Ms. Bonoff, if you want to take that out from the MOA trust contribution, that would be a better application. So thank you, Ms. Mahoney.
Trust versus.
And additionally, I assume that that is the same for amendment number 2?
We'll have to go back on that one, Ms. Mahoney. And I just want to clarify, Mr. Starr, that was trust, not trust reserves, correct? Correct. Okay. So with that, let's please vote on amendment number 3. Mr. Go ahead.
Mr. Honeman?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Okay. And then I'd like a motion to reconsider amendment number 2 so we can revisit the previous question.
Move to reconsider amendment number 2, Mr. Chairman.
Press the button for me, Mr.
Second.
Is there objection to reconsideration of amendment number 2? Seeing and hearing none, we have amendment number 2 back before us. Mr. Traney, would you please clarify your motion?
Yes, the motion on item 2 should have come out of MOA trust reserve.
Trust reserve?
Yep.
Thank you, sir. Okay, with that, please proceed to vote on amendment number 2. Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Honeman?
Yes.
So by a vote of unanimous vote, that amendment is approved. That brings us to amendment number 4. Mr. Starr?
This is a direct appropriation out of both the MOA trust and the trust reserve of $6.5 million to property tax relief from the unreserved. Well, I guess it's now reserved, but yeah, $6.5 million transferred to property tax relief.
Further discussion on that motion?
Not really. I think the trend now in 7 years, I've seen us move unreserved fund balances where we, quite frankly, after the mayor does his work with the surplus, although we haven't had very many surpluses of this size, the idea that it move into the trust and the trust reserve is sort of a holding place for that. And I'm not of the mind that once we meet the budget and once we perhaps have exceeded the budget expectations as approved the previous year, that we need to hang on to that money. $13 million was what we've appropriated through that. I think the mayor's done a fine job of doing that. So my idea is that we take half of that. There's still about $100,000 in those two accounts to get through tonight. So by moving $6.5 million to property tax relief, we still sort of preserve the other intentions of the budget.
Ms. Johnston?
Mr. Starr, is this an addition, because we're starting from the S version where we have 2.8 going to property tax relief, or is this including the 2.8?
No, this is a new one, and I guess the allocation across the 5 major funds is how the mayor tried to do his 2.8 in the S, and so this is in addition to that, so it's a 6.5 appropriation additionally on top of that.
So it would be 8.8?
Well, if you accept the mayor's, I mean, that may be modified later on in the evening.
Mr. Starr, could I ask you to press your button for me, and whoever was the second to press? Thank you, Mr. Evans. Okay. Ms. Johnston, anything further?
I guess I'll just, as much as I appreciate property tax relief, I will be a no vote tonight, because as we look into the future, and I think these budget savings that we have done this year might not happen too many more times. and I would rather be in a good, healthy spot as we go forward in the next couple of years, particularly with state resources declining. And I would rather go with the mayor's version of the 2.8 in property tax relief. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Flynn?
Yeah, I'm going to be a no vote on this also, but primarily because a significant portion of this surplus is the TAPS settlement monies, and I believe the best treatment of those is to put them into the trust, and therefore will vote against this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn.
Mr. Starr?
Well, I appreciate both of those debates, but again, you know, there was various sources of $13 million that contributed to that. There was $3.9 million of basically when the new management systems came online. If you remember the work session, we scrubbed the monies out of significant areas. We scrubbed the monies out of just sort of found money from abandoned bank accounts, and the 3.9 money was kind of that monopoly game. When you turn it over and it says community chest, you just found 3.9 million. That's a great contribution. It's not our money, though. We need to give it back. $1.1 million of that was found out in sort of the accounts specific to my area. It's not our money. We need to give it back to where it originated from. So the idea that you have, Ms. Johnson, to sort of later on deal with it isn't going to be good for me either. Taxing and savings, we have additional capital still in the banks. 3% of our emergency fund reserve is met. 10% is overfunded for our bond rating, AAA. I don't want to jeopardize any of that, trust me, but this is a safe thing to do. I'm going to have to modify the number, however, though, because Ms. Bonoff in her math had said it's not quite 6.5, it's 6.431. So my formal motion to move property tax relief is 6.431.
Mr. Evans, you were the second, that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you. We'll consider it amended. Mr. Traney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be a no vote on this one also for some of the reasons already been mentioned. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Traney. Mr. Evans.
Yes, Mr. Chair. There's been a lot of talk this evening about sharing, and I'm all for sharing, and I think we're going to see a lot of sharing as the night goes along. But as I understand it, the fund balances we have are sufficient. I'm all in favor of saving for a rainy day, but from what I understand, we're up to where we need to be on those balances. And keeping extra money within the reach of government is sometimes a dangerous thing and just leads to spending. I think this represents about half of the surplus amount ended up going back to the people it came from, so I'll be supporting this.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Ms. Johnston.
I don't usually like to double dip here, but I just wanted to clarify with Mr. Starr, I do not have any argument with you and your service area as far as the found money and having that going to property tax relief. My argument is more with the TAPS fund. I'm in agreement with Mr. Flynn that it should go into our MOA trust. Yes, it was tax money that we received and we put in reserve in case we lost our case. We still have, and I would like to ask Mr. Wheeler, there's still a number of years. This is just 1 year that has been decided. Is that correct?
Through the chair, Ms. Johnson, yes.
And how many more years?
I think we're looking at 07 through possibly 2014. You may have seen an article recently that the 2014 assessment may be in dispute.
So I just, out of a note of concern, I would rather go with Mr. Flynn's approach on the TAPS funds. But by all means, please put your service area money back to property tax relief for Chugiak and Eagle River. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Ms. Gray-Jackson, and then Ms. Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say to Mr. Starr, thank you very much for bringing forward this amendment because it's honorable that you want to give the taxpayers back money, and I agree with you. But I'm also really, really pleased that the mayor presented us with a document that already gives the community, our taxpayers, back $2.8 million, and that is also honorable. But keep in mind that the money that we're dealing with, according to Ms. Mahoney, unless I missed something, in terms of the amendments that we're working through this evening, which go up to 17, this is where the money for our amendments are coming from either the trust or the trust reserve. So with that said, I think it probably again, is a good idea, but it's probably not going to work with amendments that we have coming forward, in particular, the amendment on the SROs for $2.25 million or whatever the number is. So, again, Mr. Starr, thank you, but I don't think your amendment is going to work this evening, at least not for me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Gray Jackson. Ms. Mahoney?
My question has been addressed. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, please vote. Mr. Hall? It's okay, we're not done yet.
Yes.
Mr. Honeman? Mr. Honeman?
No.
Okay, by a vote of 4-7, that motion fails. That brings us to amendment number 5. Ms. Johnston?
This is the amendment as far as the trails for the school district, and right now I don't want to move it because I feel I have I'm not fully aware of my information here.
Then we'll move on. Amendment number 6, Mr. Trainee, or Mr. Gray Jackson, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll pass.
Amendment number 7, Ms. Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to move amendment number 7. The Department is financed in the amount of $250,000, and what this amendment will do is it will assume the cost of tax collection fees that the school district is currently paying. And I think this is a really good amendment. We have to send out tax bills anyway, and it's not a separate tax bill that we're sending out for the school district, and I think it's just not right that they should have to pay for tax bills to be sent out. And I would urge approval of this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Gray Jackson, would you clarify, is that from the trust reserve or trust that you want?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. From the trust reserve.
Thank you.
Second.
That was already seconded. Mr. Honeman, thank you. Mr. Steele.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I've always advocated that the school district is not a taxing authority. That's the municipality of Anchorage's job, and therefore we should assume this liability. So I'll be a yes vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Ms. Dombowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for the maker or whomever would like to answer. When I originally was looking at this, I was looking at this much like an IGC from a different department. So could I get some feedback on that? Because Ms. Spiegel may have changed my mind, and I would just like to have a little dialogue before I vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I may, Ms. Dombowski, I'm not sure what you mean in terms of an IGC.
Well, you know, one department does something for another department, so there's some sort of cost. Now, if what Linda says is correct, we're sending out the bills anyways, and you just tag on another line, I may have been swayed, but can you convince me that I'm looking at this? I shouldn't be looking at this like an IGC?
If I may, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Dombowski, no, you shouldn't be looking at this as an IGC because, number one, it's a whole other entity. And just like enterprise utilities, when we do IGCs with them, they really write us a check. It's different within general government when you're dealing with IGC. There's money, one line item and another line item and the bottom line number. But when we're dealing with the enterprise activities in the school district, it's an actual check that is written, so it's not an IGC at all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Dombowski.
Okay.
You want to follow up on that, Ms.
Yeah,
Dombowski?
I would love to. You know, I try to look at these amendments and I try to look at the budget in the context of what is fair and what additional costs we're going to incur and more taxpayers. I mean, when I look around and I know people in my community that are on fixed incomes, it pulls on my heartstrings because the weight and the responsibility that I feel is great. But when I listened to the public testimony, it did sway me in the fact that, you know what, common sense supports this amendment. So I will be supporting this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dombowski. Mr. Starr.
Ms. Mahoney, you can hear me okay, I assume, can you?
Yes, I can hear you.
What's the accounting principle that requires us to book the bad debt? And I talked to you about this because you're aware that not all the property taxes that we bill get collected. So the portion of the $233 million that we collect on behalf of the school district and the portion that we'll collect on ours at the other amounts, do you have to book the bad debt on the balance sheet of the ASD?
The bad debt, meaning the property taxes that we do not collect, is actually recorded on our balance sheet. But when I say our balance sheet, I mean ASD is a component of the municipality's balance sheet. Dan Moore is there, and he may be able to tell you the exact number, but I believe it is in the range of $10 to $20 million that we record and absorb on the MOA side for property taxes that are not collected.
None of this $250,000 rebill fee is used for the bad debt collection process. When I say bad debt, the urging of the folks to pay their tax bills, how do we expense the cost of just collecting the money for the bad debt?
Well, the bad debt is really recorded as deferred revenue, and at some point it becomes bad debt when it then moves into foreclosure, and then we do ultimately, when we sell a foreclosed property, collect the bad debt. But what I think is really important for you all to understand as you think about this amendment is that what we're billing here is we're just billing a portion of the expenses associated with doing the assessments for properties and then billing in the billing process. And this is really merely simply a shared services. The municipality is performing a function for the school district in that it is billing revenues on behalf of the school district.
Okay, I get that. And Mr. Moore came to the microphone, but you answered his question, so I've got it. But
Mr. Moore,
go ahead.
I'd just like to add one point. Just to put it in perspective, the school district, we collected last year $237 million for the school district. We billed them $237,000. That's 0.1%. So literally the school district received 99.9% of the money. It's not a lot of money, but I would say it's equivalent to, I'll use kind of a little silly example, but if we got together with the school district and did a bake sale, right? And we said, okay, we're gonna try to generate $500 from our bake sale. We're gonna go out and buy product for $250. We make $250 profit. The way this is set up, if you get away from, if the amendment passes, school district keeps all the profit, $250, we keep zero. What we're talking about is what Ms. Mahoney said is a shared service, a shared cost, and we're just trying to allocate it so that both sides of the benefit pay their share of the cost. It's prorated, it's actual major direct costs that are incurred for postage, envelopes, staffing, everything else. It's not an IGC, it's very real. Mr. Gray Jackson's correct, it is invoiced and billed to the school district. We've done it for 4 years, and it's a fair allocation. It's how business is done. You share the cost. So I personally would recommend against the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Honeman.
While Mr. Moore is available, can he clarify, and I'm not sure if I heard that correctly, when did the city or has the city been billing the ASD with an invoice for that dollar amount for billing, sending out the green cards and also sending out the tax bills?
I had some trouble understanding.
How many years have we been charging ASD to do this service?
It started in 2011. This would be the 4th year.
Anything else, Mr.?
Did I hear that right? It's only started since 2011?
Correct.
Okay, Mr. Moore, how long have you worked in that position in the Treasury at the MOA?
I've been in Treasury since 1999, and I can explain why we didn't do it sooner. With the major budget cuts that the city, the general government side had to face, we started getting into a very serious situation of, do we cut people? And we cannot only do 90% of the tax bills, so we have to cover that cost. And a light bulb went on when we had all these dire budget cuts. Why are we paying all the cost of the tax bills? Half of the money we generate is going to the school district, so they should pay half the cost. And that's how the idea sprung, and since then it seems to be a fair way to do it.
Mr. Honeman, anything else?
No, I guess I'll wait for debate on the topic if we're not. I'm done with the questions, Mr. Moore. Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Evans.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I think there's no doubt that the municipality is providing a service to the school district by collecting the funds that more than actually the municipality side of it benefit the school district. And I think there's certain cost involved in that. I'm still going to support the amendment for the main reason is because it's not that much money, and it eliminates a lot of these smaller issues that get held sort of over our head, that we are somehow charging the school district for things to balance our budget. I would just as soon get rid of all these things, take it on the municipality. I've found in my very limited experience that the municipality seems to do a pretty good job of being able to balance its budget. I don't have the same confidence with the school district.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Trainee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This body sets policy. And I'm going to support this amendment because we're setting a policy for this town. It's very little money associated with a line of print on your tax notes that says this much is going to the school district. Our policy, if this passes, will be for us to observe the cost. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Seeing no one else in queue, please proceed to vote. Mr. Hall.
No.
Mr. Honeman.
Yes.
So by a vote of 10 to 1, that motion carries. That brings us to amendment number 8. Ms. Johnston, do I presume you're skipping this one? Mr. Honeman, you're skipping amendment number 9, correct?
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
Brings us to amendment number 10. Ms. Johnston. Thank you, Mr. Honeman, by the way.
If I can't press move to approve yet.
How's that? Okay. May I have a second, please? Anybody? Anybody? All right, I'll do it. Go ahead, Ms. Johnston.
Great, thank you. This is addressing the increased taxing capacity we have with the state and the BSA funding, which has been estimated to be about $5.8 million. And it was my understanding at our work session that we could only tax, or we do even in past years, we tax for just half the year because we're on different calendar years. So what I have done is I've taken, we have $700,000 in our reserve account, and I suggest that we tax using the ASD mill rate $2.55 million for our 2014 year, and then we have $2.55 million that would be taken out of our reserve funds, and that would bring us to a $5.8 million for this year, knowing full well that that can come and go. It maybe is not exactly $5.8 million, but at least gets us in the ballpark for the funding for the school year.
And Ms. Johnston, could you clarify for fund balance, do you want that to come from the trust reserve or the trust deposit?
Trust reserve.
Thank you. Everyone clear on that one? Ms. Ray Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Johnson, thank you so much for bringing this amendment forward. But for me, there's an issue taking any of the money out of fund balance when we have the ability, based on the increase in the BSA, to do what we should have done some time ago, except the school district. And a lot of folks don't want to talk about the issue, but even before SB 187Z, we were limiting the amount that the school district could tax, and that therefore caused problems with future tax calculations and a little bit of their budget shortfall issues, frankly. And so I am hoping that my colleagues would realize, and the school district basically said that that is what they prefer that we do, that not take any of this out of fund balance, but the whole amount of money through property taxes. And I don't mean that in a negative way, folks, but we have not taxed or had the ability to collect the amount of taxes necessary, and we do now, because we want this funding to be sustainable. And if we take half of it from fund balance and half of it from property taxes, only half is going to be sustainable. So I would really urge my colleagues to do the right thing with this budget amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Honeman.
Yes, thanks. I too appreciate Ms. Johnson's attempt to try to, I guess you could say, use the burden on the tax increase. However, having heard numerous testifiers tonight and having had conversations with some of those folks in Juneau who are concerned about, the comments was made earlier that, the Anchorage municipality and its taxpayers aren't willing to pay its fair share, and we're not willing to tax to the cap per se. And I think that that's a very clear statement here. I think that I'm fairly convinced that, we need to make sure that in these times of concerns about getting our fair share of the funding from the state for the schools, that we need to do our part. And so for that reason, I'd like to see the funding come straight from the tax cap that's available to us, and it'll help us in the future years, as Ms. Gray Jackson pointed out. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Honeman. Ms. Domboski.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I feel like I'm in an episode of The Twilight Zone, honestly, because we have a $13 million surplus, and we're talking about taxing more. It's insane. I can't do it. I will not support anything that raises taxes, period. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Domboski. Ms. Johnston.
Well, I'm in a little conundrum because I am in support of the 4.6 going in the MOA trust. But right now, with what we've passed, we only have 1.7 in the reserve. So, and we still have, and I've understood, Mr. Wheeler, help me here. My feeling, what I got out of the work session, that we only could tax for 2014 half of the tax cap, the state's tax cap this year, but that's not correct. We could go more on the school district side. We could go all the way up to the 5.8 million.
Through the chair, Ms. Johnson, yes.
I'd like to amend my motion if I could.
Go ahead.
And raise this to 3.4 million in ASD property tax and 1.7 million out of the reserve account.
Who was the second previously?
You.
Oh, it was me. Thank you. guess I'll okay that one. Because you guys were being lazy. All right. Is there objection to the amendment to the amendment? Seeing you object, okay. Mr. Steele, on the amendment to the amendment?
I guess I'm not clear yet. The one thing I'm concerned with is the ASD tax rate going forward. If we take some of it out of the reserve, do they still have their maximum tax cap? And I guess that's my concern. I want to make sure that going forward next year, we don't have to make up room in the tax cap, that we are at the tax cap for ASD. So if I need to do something in that regard, I'd like to do it.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Starr.
Well, the concept of one tax cap needs to come into play here. There is only one tax cap. I think taxable capacity is what you guys are kind of hashing about, and the desire to preserve taxable capacity for next year's budget is next year's question. We have a tax cap formula that works our city pretty well, quite frankly. It will increase almost automatically based on, unless the CPI drops to horrendous levels. The tax cap capacity will automatically increase about $10 million next year, automatically. The idea that we're going to tax and save for purposes thereof, I'm all for it. I heard it all tonight, but we have a job to do, and that's to set that tax rate tonight. So the idea that we want to tax and preserve or tax and save is a little bit challenging. We're also bumping up about the opportunity that there isn't really a tax cap on ASD. There's a contribution cap. And so the idea that we can't tax anymore isn't necessarily it. We can't give any more yet. So, you know, I don't have any problem with the idea, but this is why we do budgets. This is why we do first quarter budget, and I guess it's just premature. I'm even struggling with the set aside on the next amendment, partly because we don't have the money left anymore, but I don't think that's an effective longer-term solution. You're still going to face the challenge next year. And if you do, you're going to have taxable capacity just based on the tax formula increasing. So, it's a noble effort. I'm not certain that by some of the other things I think will probably pass that we won't just get it done anyhow. So I'm not a no for the concept of it all, but I am a no to this way of doing it.
Ms. Gray Jackson on the amendment to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Starr, for your comment. And there's been a lot of conversation throughout the years about whether or not there's one tax cap. And I finally recognized or accepted the fact that, yeah, there is one tax cap. But the one caveat is that the school district calculates theirs separately and general government calculates theirs separately. And so the bottom line is the amount of taxes that you can collect in 1 year, that's the number that you start with the following year. And if you don't collect enough taxes to pay for services, whether it's for the school district or general government, we lose that money forever. So this amendment is talking about the ASD's tax calculation, not general government's, because we're done with ours. Well, not yet. But not general government, but ASD's. And so I really appreciate Ms. Johnson's amendment because 3.4 to make that their budget sustainable is way better than 2.55, although I still don't agree. I think it should it should be the entire 5.8 million or whatever the number is. But this is, it's a fairly good compromise in my mind. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Gray Jackson. Mr. Starr?
Well, it's kind of a point of merit. I think it's worth asking. Ms. Johnson, I don't typically come back in, but Mr. Wheeler, 214-54S is the tax appropriation for the school district, which we're going to hear and debate later on. That sets aside, based on what's presented on the S version, of $233,598 as sort of requested in the school district budget. So if this amendment passes, are we going to change the $233,598 to overfund this action? Or pragmatically, what happens? I've not done this before.
Through the chair, Mr. Starr, yeah, the levy amount in 54S would change.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing no one else in queue, please vote on the amendment to the amendment. Mr. Hall?
No.
And Mr. Honeman?
No.
So by a vote of 5 to 6, that the amendment to the amendment fails. We have the original amendment before us. Is there further discussion? Ms. Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to move in the first part of this amendment, increase ASD mill rate to reflect an addition, and I'd like to delete 3.4 million and change it to 5.8 million. And on the bottom part, I'd like to zero out the 2.55. So the total amount will be 5.8 million.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Johnston?
Ms. Gray Jackson, on that amendment, are you not taking into consideration that we have $700,000 in the reserve right now?
If I may, Mr. Chairman?
Please.
Ms. Johnson, actually, I didn't take that into consideration. So if you would like to make an amendment to my amendment to take that into consideration, I'm more than happy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Domboski?
Thank you, and I just want to be absolutely clear. So, Ms. Gray Jackson, you are proposing to raise property taxes by $5.8 million?
If I may, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Domboski, what I'm proposing is to make the ASD whole and to allow whatever budget amendment we do in terms of making them whole to make it sustainable for the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
But the revenue source is property taxes, correct?
Through the chair, yes, Ms. Domboski.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Seeing no one else in queue, please vote on the amendment to the amendment. Mr. Hall?
No.
Mr. Honeman.
Yes.
So that motion carries 6 votes to 5. That brings us back to the original motion as amended. Is there anybody else wishing to speak on this one? With that, please vote. Mr. Hall.
No.
Mr. Honeman.
Yes.
So by a vote of 6 to 5, I think that motion carries. That brings us to amendment number 11. Mr. Starr, do you want to offer that one?
Mr. Chairman, we're out of money.
That's what I thought. Okay. Amendment number 12, Ms. Domboski.
I think Mr. Evans was going to move this one.
Chicken. Go ahead,
Right
Mr.
ahead.
Evans.
Sure. Not at all, yeah. Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move amendment number 12, which is to remove $250,000 that's set aside for the Centennial Fund and have the entire amount instead applied to property tax relief.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Seconded by Ms. Domboski. Ms. Domboski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, since we're raising taxes, this is our little attempt to bring it back down a little bit. Last year, we had appropriated $500,000 worth of taxpayers' money to the Centennial Celebration. And they've done a wonderful job partnering with the private sector, but I think it's time. We've had a lot of discussion tonight about teachers, about programs, about police officers, and it's time that we put our priorities straight. And our priorities are, you know, while this might be a good project, I think the $500,000 we gave them last year was plenty of taxpayer money. And this is just an attempt to put a little common sense perspective in the mix. So I urge support. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Domboski. Mr. Trainey.
Mr. Mayor, this is coming out of your department. Can you give me your point of view on this, sir?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Trainey. We're in a fortunate position to be a city that has so much to be proud of, and the fact that next year we are 100 years old, the Centennial program, the committee that's been working so hard, has really developed an amazing social, cultural, educational program that's going to resonate through this community for a long, long time. And the economic benefits from the various events that are held will exceed this amount many, many times over with the visitors that are coming, the various events. So, you know, and not to speak, I guess, to tradition so much, but clearly over the years we've kept a bit of a separation between assembly budgets and mayor's budget. Unless there's something outrageous in there, we try not to micromanage your budget, and certainly you've had the courtesy not to micromanage ours over the years. And again, this is a small amount of money, but the ripple effect will be tremendous in our community. So I would urge a no vote on this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, to continue. I won't be supporting this. We've had a non-aggression pact, for lack of a better word, with administration. We don't muck with their budget. They don't muck in ours. And I'm going to keep that non-aggression pact going. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It will be a no vote on this.
Thank you, Mr. Trainey. Mr. Starr.
Mr. Mayor, perhaps you can tell us how much money are we spending on the Centennial so far with the private contributions in there so far? We've got $500,000 city skin in the game, and how are we doing on gathering the rest of it? And then have you got a sense of what budget target we're trying to go for here?
Yeah, we were able to match the initial contribution from the Assembly 100% with the Rasmussen Foundation grant, and since that time we've raised it's at least almost $200,000 now, and we're just really ramping up the fundraising campaign. So there's no doubt in my mind we'll be able to match this amount as well, and in fact exceed it, I'm pretty sure, by a great amount.
Well, I have a tendency to be flippant, but how big a party do we need to have here? Isn't that budget pushed us all the way over to $1 million already? What you just said, we have $1 million in the bank so far for the Centennial celebrations.
Yeah, and you know, there's members here, Jim Barnett and others, that can speak to the many, many different facets of this. It's not a party. It's a.
I get it. That's what I prefaced my statement. But what's the target number we're trying to match here? What do we need to put on the program as designed, or do we just keep adding to it until we? No.
This would be certainly the last request from the Assembly, and I think we're probably looking at about a $1.75 million total budget for all Centennial events, with which there's now many hundreds. So many groups have come forward with just amazingly creative and valuable projects for the Centennial.
Thank you.
Ms. Domboski.
Last comment, I promise. Mr. Mayor, I absolutely respect what these commissioners have done. I don't know if they're called commissioners, but board members. I've sat in some of their meetings, and with all due respect, sir, I absolutely look at it as my job as representative of 54,000 taxpayers to micromanage every penny that the government spends. I apologize for making you feel uncomfortable if I have, but
You never make me feel uncomfortable, Mr. Bosky.
I don't want you to feel that way, but I do, out of respect for the taxpayers that I represent, that's the reason I chose to bring this forward, because I felt like we just had other priorities. So I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Seeing no one else in queue, please proceed to vote. Mr. Hall.
No.
And Mr. Honeman.
No.
So by a vote of 4 yeas and 7 nays, that motion fails. That brings us to amendment number 13. Okay, Mr. Evans, are you going to cede this one to Ms. Dombowski? No. Okay, you guys are playing ping pong with me. Ms. Dombowski.
Mr. Chairman, I move amendment number 13.
Thank you, Ms. Dombowski. We have a second. Thank you, Mr. Evans. Ms. Dombowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am going to, again, on the same line, this is about priorities. This would remove $100,000 from the Office of Mayor for Mayor's Community Grants and apply the entire amount to property tax relief. I don't need to rehash it. It's the same comments that I made in the last one. I believe we have priorities, and I don't believe this ranks above police, fire, education, or roads. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Dombowski. Mr. Starr.
Mr. Mayor, we've sort of played ping pong with both these topics in and out of the budgets. Back in December, they went out, they came back in, now they're being proposed to come back out. Can you remind me what the $100,000 removal and reinsertion was to what issue were we trying to fix there when we put it back in?
Yeah, with the community grant program, we have far more requests than we're able to fund, and part of them include things like Arbor, which cleans out our homeless camps, and it's groups like that that we fund with the community grants. Also, a lot of the youth-oriented organizations, and we just have far more requests than we're able to meet, and we want to try and do a little bit more through the community. It's the sole purpose of these.
The application process, you've already gone through it for this coming year of appropriations from your department. How many grant requests did you get?
Well, I couldn't answer that off the top of my head, but I could get you that answer, I suppose.
Did all the grant money get spent last year?
Pretty close, yeah. I'm pretty sure we almost to the dime.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I can ask the mayor a question?
By all means.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for including this in the budget, Mr. Mayor, but I know that Project Access usually, and they do wonderful things for our community in terms of health care, and they usually receive $20,000 in grant, and they only got $10,000. So will they be able to get an additional 10 if this amendment is approved?
They're one of the groups that rose to the top when we actually submitted this amendment, was because we did not fund them at the same level as before, and they are doing a tremendous service for the community. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Seeing no one else in queue, please proceed to vote. Mr. Hall.
No.
Mr. Honeman.
No.
And so by a vote of 4 yeas and 7 nays, that motion fails. That brings us to amendment number 15. Ms. Johnston.
You're skipping
I'm sorry.
14?
Did I skip 14? I apologize. I was going fast. Mr. Peterson, amendment number 14?
I move amendment 14.
Please press your button, sir.
Second.
Mr. Honeman's a second. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a simple amendment that would reinvest 80% of the $170,500 that the Public Works Department budget was reduced due to energy efficiency projects. So my intent is to use funding that was saved through energy efficiencies and reinvest some of that into additional energy efficiency programs.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Starr.
Mr. Vacalis, is it appropriate to fund this back in with property taxes, or What's the funding source typical for the PM&E group that would address this?
Yes, sir. Through the chair. Typically, it's capital. It's we either bond for it or we get grants for it. Occasionally, if they're in there and they're maintaining a light fixture, the light fixture goes bad, then they'll replace it with using O&M money. They'll replace it, with the new type of ballast, et cetera. But it's usually a capital fund, sir.
So, in theory, the savings, because we've done that, the capital programs to expand, say, the LED lighting programs or some of those things will actually be enhanced anyhow on the capital side of the budget because of the savings is where the original money originated, I guess is what I'm trying to say, is that this doesn't necessarily have to go back in here and energy programs can continue to grow?
Yes, sir. As we use capital funds and as we go into our buildings, obviously part of our desires are to upgrade them to the new energy standards. So we use those capital funds for that. And we plan for that as we're renovating buildings, sir.
Yeah, to that end, I won't support the fund increase out of the intended source here, and this is the operating budget, so the idea that we're going to take property taxes and directly appropriate them to a capital function is allowable, but not good practice.
Thank you, Mr. Starr. Seeing no one else in queue, please proceed to vote. Mr. Hall.
Yes.
And Mr. Honeman.
Yes.
So by a vote of 6 yeas and 5 nays, that motion carries. That brings us to amendment number 15. Really? Ms. Johnston.
Move to approve.
Second.
We've heard a lot about SROs tonight, and I need somebody from the school district to come up. My question is...
There's 5 of you. Who's the victim?
Well, or maybe I should ask my question. I'll ask my question first, and then you can see who needs to rise to the occasion. With the SRO officers, it started out as a federal-funded program, and then the Muni took it over, and then the school district, with this budget, you have it for 9 months, and it's called community policing. I know that when I was working in the school district before, there was the SROs were not very active as far as truancy. And it seems that they've become more active in truancy. Is that correct?
Through the chair, yes. Ms. Johnston, I think the program has evolved since it first started in the Anchorage School District, and I think as those initial years were kind of fleshed out, it's become a much more comprehensive program. And in the past couple of years, we've really targeted truancy or attendance as part of working with the municipality for the CDM initiative.
So I guess my question is, and truancy is it's a state law, and it's a problem with education. If you miss days of school, you sometimes miss graduation. So is that an academic need for the SROs, or is that a community policing need, or is it a mixture?
Through the chair, there's a combination of things. I mentioned the CDM, the contributing to delinquents of a minor. That is a municipal ordinance. And 2 years ago, we started the conversation around how we could address those needs for students who have habitual truancy issues, and working with the municipality and doing that. The SROs were a big part of that because we needed them to go out and have the conversations with parents about what those ordinances were in the municipality. So I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Yeah,
but
it's
my
one concern.
It's one facet of many things that we do in the district that has been intentionally put into place over the last year and a half.
So my concern is currently with the SROs, and I know that they're part of the APD department, but do you and the school board feel like you have input and somewhat control over their mission and what they do with the current system?
I work very closely with Chief Mew. I'm actually going to be meeting with him tomorrow. We work in harmony in terms of addressing what the community needs are as well as what the district needs are. But I do not direct their training. I do not direct their leave. I do not direct their practices beyond what services they provide for us while they're in our schools.
But you're part of the mission. You maybe not direct, but you develop the mission with the chief?
I believe we work very closely together, yes.
So my interest and reason I'm bringing this up is if we go back to where the municipality pays for the total SROs, then the resources will be municipal resources, which they currently are. And the mission at times might not be completely school-related. Would that make sense?
I think it would, based on what you've been asking me around the truancy, but I believe that is a shared interest from my work with Lieutenant Henry, the SROs, as their police officers in the Anchorage community as well, because what we see is we see patterns of these behaviors where students are not coming to school, and typically there are concerns with the home situation that they get involved with at one level or another through whether it's the direct contact when they're doing a visit, or if it's something related to other criminal infractions.
So my point being, in a roundabout way, is that to me it sounds like a shared service.
It's a community-based approach to supporting our schools.
So it is. It's both for the community and for the school district, and it's a shared service for all of us, right? But it's a shared. The schools are for the community, the municipalities for the community. This is a shared service between the two entities for the greater good.
That's what we do in education.
So with my amendment, it is actually funding 50% of the SRO's office, because I look at it as a shared service. And I'm just saying, in full disclosure, if we do full funding, then it could be a shared service, but it will be more of a municipal service versus shared service between the school district and the community.
Question, Ms. Johnson?
Yes, sorry. That was the end of sorry. Oh my gosh, did I just do that?
We'll let it slide this time. Ms. Domboski. Ms. Domboski?
Mr. Bosky?
I reiterate my previous statement. I will not vote for anything to raise taxes. Thank
Fair
you,
enough. Mr. Steele.
Yes, Mr. Graff, the resource officers, when they're in the school, what takes priority? A call from the community if they get dispatched to something in the neighborhood, or their mission in terms of showing up at the front door of a parent or something like that?
Through the chair, Mr. Steele, we've had a number of cases that have gone out across the Anchorage Police Department requesting support, and what happens is that the school resource officers drop what they are doing and go after those, requests or the needs that are out there. So they definitely are part of everyday activity in the Anchorage community. And it's largely dependent upon what those requests are.
And I know you don't have, or I don't believe you have, truant officers. And so what works better, a police officer with a badge showing up at the door, or a guy in a suit with a school district ID?
Through the chair, Mr. Steele, we do not have truancy officers. What we have done is we've worked with the larger issues with students who have significant attendance truant behaviors, and the SROs work directly with the parents after they receive that information from the schools around the students' truant behaviors or concerns. So they are in fact, again, doing community enforcement because they are required to support what the municipal ordinances are.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steele.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I just have a question, and I'm not even sure who it's directed to. It's just about how this is funded. I see that the amendment source, the cost is to be property tax, and I was just wondering, in light of the previous amendment we passed with the 5.8, how does this, I'm just ignorant on this, where does this come from in property taxes?
Yeah. Well, I'll let Marilyn answer the technical question as to how close we are to our overall cap, but no matter what we're taxing for, it all goes under the same cap. Okay. So, Marilyn,
And it would be it could not be from the ASD side because we've taxed to the state's cap, but it comes from the additional taxing capacity we have overall with our tax cap.
So with that, Marilyn, how close are we at this point?
Through the chair, we're at 4.1 million under the cap.
But before this amendment? Before the amendment?
Correct.
Thank you. Mr. Starr.
No, that was kind of the question. I want to make sure we can, if this one doesn't go, if we can do the next amendment and still be okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Starr. Ms. Johnston. All done? Okay. Seeing no one else in queue, please vote. Mr. Hall.
No.
Mr. Honeman.
No.
So by a vote of 4 yeas and 7 nays, that motion fails. That brings us to amendment number 16.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to move amendment number 16.
Second.
Police Department, $2.250 million to fully fund the cost of school resource officers. And the funding would come from whatever's left in the MOA trust reserve and the balance out of the MOA trust. And somebody else can run the numbers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Okay. Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, please proceed to vote. Mr. Hall.
Yes.
Mr. Honeman.
Yes.
So by a vote of 9 yeas and 2 nays, that motion carries. That brings us to amendment number 17. Mr. Honeman. You skip this one?
Yeah, I believe we had originally the administration had $2.8 million in surplus, and I'm not sure where we're at for property tax relief. I'm not sure where we're at with the amendments we had tonight. Can somebody help me out here? Are we below or above?
There's still 2.8 in property tax relief in the S version, Mr. Honeman, so this is probably not necessary.
Okay, well, then if I was going to make the amendment to $2 million, however, I think I'll not introduce this one. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Bosky, I see you in the queue.
Thank you. I will go ahead and move amendment number 17.
Second.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, may I?
Please.
Thank you. I think Mr. Honeman was on the right path, though he may second-guess himself. This is a $2 million property tax refund from fund balance for taxpayer relief, and I absolutely think this is a great idea, and I fully support it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And just to clarify, Ms. Dubosky, that would come from the trust. Because that's all we have left at this point. Right. Thank you, Ms. Dubosky. Ms. Johnston.
Actually, I'm not sure. Where are we with the trust reserve?
It's empty now.
Is it empty?
Yeah.
Okay. And is this the addition to the 2.8? I'm sorry, my thing's fallen off. The 2.8 from the mayor's S version?
It would be, yes. All right. Seeing no one else in queue, please proceed to vote. Mr. Hall.
Yes.
Mr. Honeman.
If you're sure we have the funding, I'm going to trust you. Yes.
Motion carries. I have 4 more amendments. I don't know if we need to do them. One's labeled Parks by Ms. Gray Jackson. I have 4 amendments that I don't know where they came from. They're not numbered. Are these?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Whatever you have in your hands, just dump it.
Dump it. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That brings us to the main motion, which is 2014-94S, the first quarter budget amendments. Mr. Starr.
Well, several points, and I'll try not to be over the top here, but to Ms. Mahoney and Maryland's crowd, Ms. Bonhoff, you're doing great work over there keeping up. We talked this morning, we talked yesterday. Elizabeth doing our stuff at the levels that are required to kind of herd cats from time to time without violating open meeting laws and all the other things. And so, kudos to you facilitating that process. And as I announced at the work session, this is sort of my last rodeo here on trying to bring all this to bear. And it's not because I don't like doing it, but I think I'm sort of out of ideas. 6 years of sort of massaging this, and it's not to complain about the amount of work, just to illustrate what it is and what it takes. But we've come a long ways in sort of understanding the budgets. We've understood revenues now throughout the year. We get our arms around the process. So whoever yields to the committee positions, either as chair or just involved in the committee itself, we got to keep the momentum going, the education level and the engagement thereof. But I don't know that I've done it right. I've done it, but it ends in April, starts up again in August, and it sort of never ends. And so all the various bodies, Ms. Gray Jackson, you've been around for a while, watched it go, you were chair at times. There's a lot of different ways to do this. You try not to make sausage. Tonight we dealt with an element that we hadn't previously, which was increased ASD pressures inside of our operating budgets. That was new and different and needs to be done as well. So I sort of yield. I urge approval of it. We've got to do it. We've got to get the tax bills out. And then again, just thanks for the listening and sometimes the friction speak that comes out from me. And it's not intentional. It's just passion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Starr. We appreciate it. Mr. Craney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I urge support of this. We've seen a good assembly come together on this. Some things we agree on, some things we don't. But we all care about the taxpayers and citizens of this town. So please vote yes on this thing. Let's move on.
Thank you, Mr. Craney. Ms. Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to follow Mr. Starr's lead and thank Marilyn and the OMB staff and the mayor's staff, period, in terms of our budget. And I also want to thank our staff. I'm just really, really glad to have some help because I don't care how much I know about budgets. I just don't have the time, and I appreciate your work. And I want to thank Mr. Starr for his leadership in terms of the Budget Finance Committee for the last 5 years. I was truly honored, believe it or not, Mr. Starr, to serve on that committee and let you take the lead. And you did a fine job. And again, thank you for your leadership. And I also want to thank all of my colleagues here for this evening. I really feel that we came together and we did the right thing in a lot of areas. And we don't always have to agree on everything because that's just not natural. But I think we did a really fine job this evening in terms of, giving money back to the taxpayers, giving money to the community for grants and the Centennial event, and amongst others. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Gray Jackson.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Honeman.
I just first want to apologize to the public and, of course, you, my colleagues, that I'm not available to be in person in Anchorage today. I had a conference pre-planned, and I'm not blaming on anybody, but the legislature being a little over on their timeline, created the circumstances. But I'm glad we were able to work through the amendments, and I take serious the fact that we are raising some taxes for the school district side, but I do believe it's the right thing to do at this time to show that we are supportive of our schools. And I want to thank all the public for coming out and supporting it, and again to thank Mr. Starr for his leadership on the Budget and Finance Committee for all these years, and thanks to the MOA staff as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Honeman. Mr. Steele.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to chime in. We did some good things here today, and I want to congratulate my colleagues. Educational funding, we saw. We've seen the cuts that have taken place over the years, and we saw the last legislative session. And I'm glad that we have done what we can do to help our kids. Education is struggling right now. Some of the cuts that were made are doing damage right now, and I hope this helps put our schools in a position where it's not going to be as bad. And maybe next year we'll be able to make a little progress with the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I agree that I think we have made a step in the right direction tonight. I think we've shown a commitment from the Anchorage Assembly and the community of Anchorage towards education. And I hope this is the first step in a continuing number of steps in the future that we will take to continue to improve education in Anchorage. And I also want to thank Mr. Starr for his hard work on the budget. And I know it took a lot of time, and you did an excellent job. Thank you.
Seeing no one else in queue, please proceed to vote. Mr. Hall.
Yes.
Mr. Honeman.
Yes.
That carries unanimously. Mr.
Chairman, move immediate consideration of 94S. Urgent no vote.
Second.
Please proceed to vote. Urgent no vote. Mr. Hall.
No.
Mr. Honeman.
No.
So that motion fails 0 to 11. That brings us to item 2014-53. The rates of tax levy, approving the amount of municipal property tax and levying taxes for all general service areas, municipality of Anchorage for general government for 2014. The S version. Mr. Trainee, please. We already had the public hearing.
Move to approve the S version, sir.
Thank you. And 53S. And we need to make this.
Second.
Okay. We're 53S, yes.
Okay.
Mr. Starr, I have you in the queue, but I need Mr. Trainee to make a quick motion here.
Sorry.
Is that okay?
Chairman, I make a motion that Chief Fiscal Officer is authorized to make any necessary corrections to adjust budget amendments to reflect actual funds available in any fund balance utilized in support of the budget amendments adopted herein, and to correct manifest clerical errors, sir.
Second.
Okay. Any objection to that motion? And for Mr. Evans and Mr. Peterson, the purpose of that motion is we've made some budget amendments. This allows the CFO to make adjustments to these mill levies to reflect those actual expenditures. Mr. Starr, you were in the queue earlier. Do you wish to? That was it. Thank you very much, Mr. Starr. With that, please. The second was Mr. Honeman. And then as soon as I can, I will get everyone voting. Still frozen.
I'm going to reset.
What did I do?
Okay, ready?
Yep. Still browned out.
Are we going to move the motion again?
Let's try again. So, is this going to work for you? I think we're good.
Okay, there it is.
There we go. Mr. Hall.
Yes.
Mr. Honeman.
Yes.
That motion carries 11 to 0.
Mr. Chairman, move immediate consideration of the S version. Urgent no vote.
Second.
Buttons, please.
I'm waiting.
Mr. Trainee. And go. Urgent no vote, please. Mr. Hall.
No.
Mr. Honeman.
No.
That motion fails 0 to 11. That brings us to item 2014-95, a resolution of the Municipality of Anchorage revising and appropriating funds for the 2014 utilities and enterprise activities operating budgets. Mr. Starr.
I didn't hear what you just said. Sorry.
This is a 95, the utility budgets.
Oh, move to approve.
Hold on for a second. We need to add this into the S version too, according to that.
There is no S version for the utilities.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Starr. Do I have a second for 95? Ms. Domboski, thank you.
Second.
Is there anyone who wishes to speak to this matter? Seeing, hearing none, let's please vote on 2014-95. Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Honeman?
Yes.
So by a vote of 11 yeas and 0 nays, that motion carries. That brings us to our final item of the night, item 2014-54S, an ordinance setting the rate of tax levy, approving the amount of municipal property tax, and levying taxes for the Anchorage School District for tax year 2014. Ms. Bonzoff, do you want us to give you the motion with flexibility, or do you want to give us a number? Flexibility. All right. May I have a motion on 2014-54S?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
You got a motion to approve,
Second.
Mr. Johnson?
Motion to approve, sir.
Second.
Okay. And then Mr. Traney.
I have a motion that Chief Fiscal Officer is authorized to make any necessary corrections to adjust budget amendments to reflect actual available funds, any fund balance utilized in support of the budget amendments adopted herein, or to correct manifest clerical errors.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there objection to that motion? Seeing, hearing none, it's approved. Please proceed to vote on the motion 2014-54-S. Mr. Hall?
Yes.
And Mr. Honeman?
Yes.
So by a vote of 11 yeas and 0 nays, that motion carries. Mr. Traney?
Move for immediate consideration, urge a no vote.
Please
Second.
push the button, sir. Ms. Domboski? We're a little too fast for the clerk. My fault. Sorry about that. Whenever you're ready, Madam Clerk.
Okay, I am ready for a motion to.
No votes. It's in there.
Got it?
And please proceed to vote.
Urge a no vote.
Mr. Hall?
No.
Mr. Honeman?
No.
So by a vote of 0 yeas and 11 nays, that motion fails. That brings us to our final item on the agenda, the most important one, adjournment. May I have a motion,
Mr.
please?
Chairman, can I ask a question on the record for Ms. Mahoney?
Of course. Go ahead, Mr. Cox.
Ms. Mahoney, are you still on?
Yes, I am.
The original budget that we approved in December has the 6-year fiscal plan attached to it, and knowing what we've changed in that plan tonight, are you required to change the 6-year fiscal plan, or I guess do you plan to change it?
I'm not required to change it because the code indicates that it goes out, I think it's like 90 days before the end of the year. However, there are times when I rerun scenarios if I see a significant fiscal impact to our ability to have a balanced budget with services that meet our citizens' requirements.
So the observation that it's actually in front of our budget book this year doesn't necessarily make it part of the budget that we just modified, right?
It does not.
Okay, thank you. That's all, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Mr. Starr.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Any objection? We're done.